7 o'clock. I would like to call to order this meeting of the Charter Review Committee, Thursday, September 26th, 7 p.m. This meeting is scheduled to go till 9 p.m. City Clerk, would you call the roll?
Committee Member Silva, is this working? Oh, it is. Yeah, that's good. Committee Member Silva,
Here.
Committee Member Rocosa,
Present.
Committee Member Colterman,
Here.
Committee Member Cooley,
Here.
Committee Member Benito,
Here.
and Committee Member Almazal.
Here.
And Chair Jane.
Here. Okay, so now is the time when we ask the public if they would like to talk to us about something that is not on the agenda. And seeing that there aren't very many people here, I reserve my prerogative, and I would like to extend the speaking time to 3 minutes from our normal 2 minutes.
Excuse me, Chair, there's a couple announcements that I would like to make.
Oh,
at the
yes,
beginning, if that's okay.
yes.
So for those here physically in the room, we're at the Mission, or for those who are not in the room, we're at the Mission City Library. And the library does close at 8 o'clock, but they will keep this portion of the library open, and access to the restrooms will be open. You just may see some activity and some of the lights on that side, the far side, being turned off, but we're not going to be locked in here, so don't worry. And then the second one, Suds, is a correction that we might need to do on the agenda on item number 6. I don't know if you want to take that now or after the public presentations.
I don't know. City Attorney, when is the best time to change the agenda?
I don't know if you're necessarily changing the agenda. I would just discuss it when you get to that item. about
Okay,
why the
very
title
good.
is a little bit off.
Member Silva.
When the public's addressing, is it possible we can have them say if they're a resident or not? I know everybody's opinion is important, but even in our survey, we ask if it's a resident or not when they're speaking.
We used to do that at city council meetings. We stopped doing that some time ago, but I'm very happy to have people state whether they're residents. So would any member of the public like to address something that is not on the agenda? Please step forward to the microphone. You have 3 minutes. Please state your name and whether you're a resident.
Thank you. Is this thing on? My name is Steve Chesson, because I have to stand very close. I'm president of Californians for Electoral Reform, and I do not live in Santa Clara. I did have a question. Will I be able to speak on agenda item 6 later on? You're going to allow public presentation?
Oh, yes, there will be public comment on every item on the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Then I'll confine my comments to items that aren't on the agenda. Another hat that I wear is I happen to be a member of the Santa Clara County Citizens Advisory Commission on Elections. And while I'm not speaking for a case, I did want to let you guys know that the county has signed a contract with Dominion for new voting equipment that will be deployed next year in 2020. And that new equipment can handle both limited voting, which I believe Mr. Cooley is going to be speaking about later, and will also be able to handle ranked choice voting, both the single winner form and multi-winner form. So if you decide you want to use those in your 2022 elections, those options would be available from the county. Thank you.
Any other member? Please step forward. Did you have a comment, sir? You can comment on what he said. You can comment on anything that's not on the agenda. You can comment about the weather if you want. Oh, it does? Okay. Okay. You have 3 minutes. Yeah, 3 minutes.
My name is Manuel Avila. I live here in the city of Santa Clara. I don't want to do that because people think I'm trying to get romantic here. Come on, guys. Pick up the speed on this. Do better? All the rest of you have to do the same thing because I can't hear you when you're speaking in your microphone. So please get close, as I'm required to get close right now, too. I am a resident. I live on Benton Street, and one of my big concerns is the amount of traffic that is found on Benton Street during the course of the day. between the evening hours of 4 to 7 at night. We have multiple cars going through, and we have speeders. And I personally can attest that I have lost 3 cars due to cars colliding, once when I was in it, and 2 other times when they were parked on the side of the
Excuse
street.
me, traffic is not the purview of this committee.
I know, but you also said that I could speak about anything.
Well, that was my impression, but the attorney's telling me otherwise.
So,
But it is relevant in this case, Your Honor.
I'm not an honor, but,
I know you're not on.
no,
Let me-
so
Can I complete my
if you
thought,
want to
please?
tie it into voting, that's okay.
Can I complete my thought, please? Thank you much. The reason I'm asking or commenting on this is because as part of having districts, would an individual district that covers an area have a person that can be a spokesman, a powerful spokesman, hopefully, to address some issues that are being ignored by the rest of the city and relevant to the people who live on that street or that immediate area? And that's unclear to me. I've looked at literature, but I find no answers there. I merely find broad, general statements about the role of, or the possibility, strength, or what have you, of districts rather than at large. So the question then stands, has that been settled? Is it something that will come up in the future? How will we know to what extent is it worth voting for a member of a particular district if they do not in fact represent very strongly the people who live in that district? Among them, of course, are traffic concerns.
Can I respond to his comment?
Sure, I could respond to as well.
Feel free, go ahead.
Sir, under our charter, council members are the legislative body, and they don't have power to do administrative things like, on an individual basis, affect traffic. So the city council acting together can create policies regarding traffic, which they would vote on together. So under a district system, you would have one representative for your district that you would vote for, and that representative would be one of 7 votes to generally vote on matters of traffic in the city or even in the district. But a district representative, which we currently have for at least 2 districts, does not have any administrative power over ordering staff around, nor would that change if it went to any other type of district system.
So having an individual district requires support and activity of the other members of the
So,
city hall, city council.
Your 3 minutes are up.
Oh, sir, how can you do that to
I'm
me?
sorry, but I would like to respond to you. One of the criticisms of a district system is that you have mini mayors. You have people that just are concerned about their little part of the city, and they're not, say, team players sometimes. So that is one of the concerns people have. And so presumably, if that were to happen, your council member would really be concerned about the issues in your district. So that is, it's a plus and minus. So I'm sorry, you're done.
How can you do this to me? We used
That's
to
just
shake
the way
hands
the
once upon a
policy
time. Thank you.
works. That's the way the policy works. Okay. Would any other member of the public like to speak? Oh, yes, Teresa.
Hi, I'm Teresa Sulzer, and I'm a resident of the city of Santa Clara. So, as you consider what to recommend in terms of districts, and I know you guys have done a lot of information gathering, I'm not sure the information is really permeating out into the community about how more districts promotes democracy. And that would be the perspective that I would have, that more districts allows more people run for election. It allows public officials to be held accountable because the chances are they're really going to know the people that have voted for them or interact with those people on a daily basis. And as I've spoken to people around the city with the change in the elections, most people think of this as removing their democracy because they're only getting to vote on one seat. And I'm not sure that we're doing a great job of educating people as to why the districts make sense. So I'd really like, I would like to see some more information being disseminated, the pros and cons of the 2, 3, and 6 districts so that people can make informed decisions. And I think that's been hard for people to get. That's my impression.
There is an FAQ on our website now.
No, yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I have
okay,
seen that.
okay.
I actually kind of meant pros and cons like you'd have on the ballot. When something goes on a ballot in the state of California, I think that might be a little bit more helpful so people can read and really process the information, especially because 6 districts feels overwhelming in a small city, but I actually think it really would improve people getting involved.
We can't have a conversation, I'm sorry. Okay. Would any other member of the public like to speak on something that is not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item number 3. And this is where you get to talk about your preferences. Basically, you may have seen the survey, you might want to emphasize what you did on the survey, or whether you prefer 6, 17 districts, or whatever you like. So come forward if you have an opinion. Okay, seeing none. All right, we are now moving on to a report from the city clerk on the survey results. And any
So-
other feedback that we've
Yeah,
received.
so since the Saturday meeting, there have not been any additional surveys filled out online. There has been one paper survey that was submitted. I believe you each have a copy of it.
Yes.
And there's some for the public at the desk when you enter the community room. And there were also just a couple emails. The response is not included here, but just general questions about accessing the minutes from a prior meeting. So that is the additional input that the city has received since Saturday.
Would you like to summarize the results of the survey for people who didn't see last week's meeting?
This is just one survey, so I mean, I think folks.
The surveys in general.
In
The
general, online.
238.
Oh.
What was the result of the 238 surveys that have been received?
I'd have to pull up my numbers again.
So what I read from the surveys was there's been 238 surveys completed, 149 for 6 districts, 78 for some other number, and then 55 for 3 districts. That was what I pulled up, but.
I'd have to pull it up, but we did discuss it on Saturday, so I'd have to pull it up, and if I get it, I can share that again.
Okay. All right. I think we can move on to number 5, unless any committee members have a
We
comment.
did get a response. We did get a response about the minutes out. I saw it in the packet. I just want to make sure we got them. The guy asking about the minutes, we got him a good response.
Yes, sorry. I didn't hear your question.
I did have another question. Do we know if the charter review information, I don't get paper bills anymore, went out in the SVP bill or the water bill or whatever we send out? It was sent out? Okay.
Just for those who are, yes, the answer is yes.
Okay, good. All right, now we can move on to the next item on our agenda, which is, would members of the committee like to report on any outreach that you've done? Yeah, Member Silva.
Not much, but I had about a handful of people that watched the last meeting on that Saturday, and 4 of them approved of our stall poll, and 1 didn't. So that's the only information I have from that.
Okay, Member Coltman.
Sorry. So I had some online discussion, so it was email as well as messaging with people, and everyone agreed with what I had said, the reasons at the last meeting, the reasons why 6 districts are an advantage. So first, voters really know their candidates, that this is really a huge advantage. The districts are small enough for candidates to be able to walk and meet everybody, walk and knock on doors in their district. Candidates will be far less dependent on money from special interests. There are really good people who would love to run for office, but they find the prospect of raising the kind of money that it takes to get elected in Santa Clara really daunting, so they don't even try. We used to care about how much money was being spent on elections, and the fact that the bigger our districts are, the more special interest money can flow in to elect candidates that are not representative of the people is a huge issue. And we've seen this over and over in the at-large elections that we have had in the city. We open the opportunity for more people to run. We open the opportunity for more good people to run. I think there are many people in the city who would make good city council members who haven't wanted to step into the politics in Santa Clara because of not only the money that needs to be raised, but just the way that people have been treated and the at-large districts where people run as a slate for specific seats that aren't tied to anything. A side effect, a beneficial side effect of the California Voters' Rights Act and dividing the city into districts is that we get geographic representation. We get the kind of representation that the first gentleman, the speaker, was talking about, where you have somebody living in the neighborhood and they understand what the issues are, like traffic, like parking, like development, like the garbage pilot program, that affect residents in a particular area. So there's somebody on the council who can be a vocal proponent of making sure the neighborhoods are being taken care of throughout the city. I have two questions for the city attorney, and so it's my understanding that if we go for 6 districts, that we cannot be sued again under the California Voters' Rights Act, because the remedy for what was happening in the city, for the at-large voting that was diluting the votes of minority members, is to go to district voting. So that my question to the city attorney is, would you say yes, that if we have 6 districts, we can't be sued again under the California Voters' Rights Act?
I don't know if you couldn't be sued, because the California Voting Rights Act doesn't just have to do with districts, it has to do with the rights of people. If you drew the districts in the wrong way or something, it's possible you might get sued, I don't know. But it's less likely that if you had 6 districts that someone would sue you, yeah.
Okay, and then the other comment that I received was that, so if we go to 3 districts, we don't have that same level of protection, and in addition, we heard Dr. Gobele at the last meeting.
That's not true. I mean, I wouldn't say that.
Okay, well, we heard Dr. Gobele at the last meeting say...
She's not a lawyer.
That, I understand, but she mentioned the Federal Voters' Rights Act that...
I'm not sure exactly what she was trying to say, but I don't agree with what she was saying, that there would be some type of greater legal liability if you went to a different system.
Okay, well, when that opportunity arises, I would, for a particular agenda item that fits, I would like to hear from Dr. Gobele again about that issue. Thank you, Suds.
Member Silva.
One question to the city clerk or city attorney. When we went to 6 districts this last election, was the amount of, I think it's a voluntary amount of spending on elections change?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
When we went to 6 districts this last election, the amount spent on an election for candidate, does that change?
No, it did not change from moving over from our previous method of election to the district election.
So that's maybe something to consider when changing to more elections. And also, wasn't it the court order for the voters of Santa Clara, because we're a charter city, to look into different ways of changing our election process?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Wasn't the court order that went from districts to 6 districts and given us the opportunity to look into other ways of doing 6 districts?
All the court order did was provide a remedy under the court's decision. It didn't. The court at one point, before it reached the decision to go to 6 districts, did issue a series of orders requiring us to go through a kind of a truncated process under the election code for drawing districts, and it received recommendations from a districting committee about what those districts should look like. But in terms of the court order that ended up being part of the judgment, all it did was say, in the 2018 and the 2020 elections, you're going to have these 6 districts under this district map. And the sequence was 2 in 2018 and 4 in 2020. But that's the sum total of the court order.
Okay, any other member? Okay, I neglected to ask for public input on item number 4, so I'm actually going to bundle the two. So would any member of the public like to speak on our public outreach methods, how we're doing public outreach, any discussions that you've had with any of the committee members? Pardon?
I saw a hand.
Well, this specific item, I don't think Mr. Chesson had a comment on how we're doing the outreach. Do you? I think that at some point, we're going to ask Dr. Gobele to come up, and at that time, I will ask you to come up and speak on this item. But does any member of the public have any comments on how we're doing our outreach? You know, failures of our outreach process, or what you like about it, what you don't like about it? Okay, seeing none. So at this time, I am going to open up that issue about retrogressing. So
I would request that I at least have an opportunity to have a conversation with Dr. Gobele before you inflict a debate between the two of us when we're not really sure what each other is
well,
talking
I did
about.
ask the clerk, and I believe I asked you to have a response on retrogressing for this meeting. And I don't know why it didn't get onto the agenda, but I specifically made that request.
Well, I didn't receive that information, so.
Okay, well, I'm not happy.
I'm not saying that Dr. Gobele should not speak, but I would like to talk to her before she speaks so that it doesn't turn into a discussion without a real
Well, my problem
a common
is,
basis of understanding of what we're talking about.
my problem is that this is the meeting where we make recommendations for what we are directing you to draft for.
Well, you've asked the city attorney to be here, so if you have a legal question, you can ask me.
So,
But
so my question is, it is a legal question. I
Okay,
want to
what's your legal
know
question?
about the issue that she raised at the last meeting, which is that, and I'd actually asked Dr. Gobele to come up and speak on this now, because my understanding of what she said was that under federal Voting Rights Act, to reduce the number of districts could get you into trouble. So Dr. Gobele, would you like to talk about retrogressing?
This is really inappropriate for verbal reports from committee members. I completely agree that the issue of how much things retrogress would be great under either 6 or 8 or 9.
Okay, we could
but,
move it
yeah,
to
I
6.
just
We'll move it to 6. All right.
sorry. This is not appropriate for 5.
All right. So,
So why don't we go through these?
so we're moving on to number 6 because I didn't see any public input on how we're doing our outreach. So on item number 6, is there a staff presentation on different forms of 3-member districts?
Come on. Cool. All right. So in the last committee meeting on Saturday, the committee took action, and I do want to mention that there is the motion that was made on Saturday by committee member Cooley and seconded by committee member Rocosa and passed unanimously is what is in your agenda, but it doesn't match what the entire discussion was. So I think there was just maybe a correction that needed to be made to the motion or to the agenda. So the agenda item says discuss different forms of 3-member districts, and I think it was discuss different forms of 3 districts, not 3-member districts, and then 6 districts as well was part of that, and then transition plans. So I don't know if we need to maybe not in this meeting, but when we approve the minutes in October, maybe you as a committee might consider taking a motion to amend the minutes from the Saturday meeting to make that minor correction.
Ryan, City Attorney, is that correct that we would, if we wanted to correct this motion was wrong, not what we intended at the next meeting?
I understand.
The, this is not a motion, right? I mean, this is just simply a discussion.
At the
on
last
the-
meeting, we had a motion, and the discussion was about talking about 3 districts, and
But-
the motion was worded 3-member districts. And so the recommendation from the clerk was correct it when you do the minutes. I wanted to make sure that was the correct.
I guess you could do it under the minutes, but all you're really doing is indicating to the public that this concept will be discussed. You're free to change, even if this had been what your motion was, you're free to still change that decision. All the Brown Act requires is you give a general idea of what you're going to be talking about. So you're not restricted to this motion or any other motion at this discussion point. You can make a different motion than what than the words on this piece of paper. So you're free to correct the minutes if you'd like to, or by discussing it and saying, hey, when we made that motion, it came out the wrong way, and that'll be reflected in the minutes today.
Well, what it is everything that was discussed was correct, and if we had minutes, the minutes would have reflected that.
Okay.
It's just this agenda is worded incorrectly, this agenda item. And so,
I thought I think we will just correct whatever we need to correct from a minute standpoint then when the minutes come forward. But as far as what you can do now, you're free to discuss any recommendation about
Okay.
districts.
okay, so we are now, despite what the agenda says, we are now discussing 3 districts. So City Clerk, would you present
on-
on our options?
Yeah, so on Saturday, the committee asked to consider what options the city would have if they went to 3 districts and 6 districts, and what the transition plan would look like in all of those scenarios. So I have prepared those slides, and again, this is to guide your discussion. You're free as a committee to discuss what I have up here on the slide, or anything else that you'd want to discuss. So again, this is not this is just to guide the discussion and try to frame it, and also to get everybody to start thinking about the intricacies and the nuance of what each of these options might look like, especially when it comes to the transition plan.
If you look at the option that is labeled 3-3 option, if you look at that option, at election years, that option functions as 3 single-member districts that alternate.
Yes.
Okay, so I was going to get to that, but that's fine in terms of like what each system looks like, because that wouldn't apply on the 2-4. So, okay, yeah. So the way to read this, on the left-hand side, and for clarity, the map in the middle it's just for conceptual purposes. Those are it's not where the lines are to be drawn. So this is just for conceptual purposes. I want everybody to be super clear on that. And we're just, for the sake of the discussion, we're calling them districts A, B, and C, although most jurisdictions number their districts and not letter them. So again, this is just conceptual, and I did that intentionally so that there wouldn't be any misconception that we're trying to force lines drawn being here, there, and that this is District 1 or what's 2 and what's 3. So just to be really clear. On the left-hand side, what the 3/3 option means is that you are electing 3 council members in gubernatorial election cycles, and then the /3 is that you are electing 3 in a presidential cycle. On the right-hand side, you are electing 2 council members in the gubernatorial cycle, and on the 4 council members in the presidential cycle. So that's how you read it. There's also, you'll find that on the 6th district plan as well, what that looks like. So on the left-hand side, in gubernatorial years, you would elect 1 council member from each district. And the mayor would continue to be elected on the gubernatorial election cycles. And during the presidential election cycles, you are also electing 1 council member from each of the districts, and the city clerk and the police chief are elected citywide during the presidential cycle. I'm not listing the mayor and the city clerk and police chief races here to be part of the recommendation of the change, but I want everybody to be aware that council members are not the only ones being elected during these election cycles. And what the balance in terms of the committee members, it's not the community, not committee members, but the community is looking for on their ballot, they will see other Santa Clara races on their ballot in addition to the races for the council. So the benefits of the 3/3 option is that all voters throughout the city get to vote in every election cycle. So you are voting for one council member every election cycle in addition to the citywide races. The other benefit, as we mentioned on Saturday, is that it is a known fact that voter turnout in gubernatorial years is less than voter turnout in presidential years. And so by ensuring that all council districts are electing a council member at every cycle, there is no unfair imbalance relative from one district to the other when it comes to electing council members because of the voter turnout. And as City Attorney Brian said, that this option also, because all council districts are electing one council member per election cycle, it would serve as a single member district. On the right-hand side, you have 2/4. In the gubernatorial years, so just to give context to everybody watching who may not be fully aware, our current system, whether it was before the court order or even after the court order, is a 2/4 system. So in gubernatorial years, the city of Santa Clara elects 2 council members. And in presidential years, the city of Santa Clara elects 4 council members. So the 2/4 is what the city of Santa Clara has been doing for as long as I've been here, which, you know, I don't know if it was ever any different. So so what it would look like with 3 districts here is that one of the districts would elect both of their council members in the gubernatorial years. The other 2 districts don't elect any council members during the gubernatorial years. In the presidential years, the 2 council districts that did not elect in the gubernatorial years would elect both of their council members each during the presidential year. And the district that participated in electing for a council member in the gubernatorial years would sit that one out. So in this system, not all voters throughout the city have an opportunity to vote for a council member in every election. However, when it is their turn, they vote for 2 at once. Okay? And that's the final bullet on the right-hand side is when you are voting for 2 at once, it is considered a multi-member district for that purposes of how, you know, winners are determined. And there may be, depending on the election method, it may be easier for minorities to win. Committee member Cooley did reach out to me since Saturday, and as a result of the discussion that was had on Saturday, with some material that he would like to share to kind of convey what that looks like in a hypothetical scenario. And I know he's provided every committee member and 2 members of the public with the material that he's willing to share. So when I finish this, if you don't mind, Committee Member Cooley, then you're free to obviously answer any questions or kind of walk people through what you prepared. Because not all districts are electing their council members in every election cycle, there is an imbalance of elections between gubernatorial and presidential. So before I go on, are there any questions from the committee members on how I've presented what the 3 districts could look like in either 3/3 scenario or the 2/4 scenario?
I have a question. When you have multi-member elections, does that necessarily have to be, is that just the top 2 vote getters get it, or it doesn't have to be ranked choice or anything else?
So that's basically what I'm alluding to in the final bullet, is that this all depends on the election method, the counting method that the city would choose to use in a multi-member district scenario. So there are many different forms of elections, whether, like you said, there's single transferable vote, ranked choice voting, instant runoff vote, there's cumulative voting, there's first past the post. There's a lot of different election methods. And depending on if we go to a multi-member district, that would be a discussion that needs to be had about how the counting of ballots happen. And part of that is in the analysis from Committee Member Cooley as to when you pick different systems, does that make it easier for minorities to win? So the threshold for a minority to win or for any candidate to win changes depending upon which method of election is picked. But that discussion probably doesn't need to be had unless the committee feels like a multi-member district option is the way to go. It is less relevant in what would be considered single-member districts, although there is an impact as well if you are using instant runoff voting versus first past the post. So there is certainly a merit to having some sort of a discussion, but I think for the purposes of just moving the committee forward, we should probably hone in on what the system looks, what the district cycle looks like, and not at this moment consider changing the way we do the counting. So, but certainly that is something that would need to be discussed at some point in the future. Yeah.
I think in your discussion, you have to be very careful about the concept of helping minorities to win. We have an equal protection clause in the United States, and the standard under the California Voting Rights Act is for minority voters to be able to elect the candidate of their choice, not necessarily elect people that are not white. So I think that that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And there are more minorities in Santa Clara than just Asians who are the subject of the CVRA. The last time we did analysis on districting, we looked at Filipino voters, we looked at Hispanic voters, we looked at African American voters. So we have to keep all ethnic voters in mind when we start drawing the districts. So I think we have to be extremely careful about the concept of, you know, do we need to draw a district where a certain minority will win, or what we think about that. So I would caution you to not necessarily think of it that way, as opposed to just kind of sticking to the rules under the. I would really focus on the Federal Voting Rights Act as well as the California Voting Rights Act.
So I just want to make a comment, is my goal on this committee is to get something on the ballot that will pass. And if I look at Measure A, coupling districts with ranked choice voting did not pass. I don't think it would pass this time. And I just want to make that opinion.
Okay, are there any questions, other questions on what I presented on this slide? Because I'd like to go on to what the transition plan would look like in 3 districts. Yeah.
So just a note on that point about the imbalance. We talked about it a little last time, but if the terms of the members changed, either 2 or 6, that goes away, or if we elected them all in the same year, it would go. We talked about electing them all in the same year at the last meeting. So the concern about the imbalance could be addressed in other ways. I'm assuming we don't have any slides on that, but it's just something to be aware of.
I did not prepare an option where it would be 0-6, right? So that is another option. Certainly the committee is free to discuss that, but on Saturday, my sense from the discussion was that there was not favorability towards turning over the entire council in one election cycle for the purposes of continuity and for other reasons that were brought up on Saturday. So certainly you could consider a 0/6 option. And as you mentioned, there could be a scenario where you extend council members' terms from 4 years to 6 years, and so that would alternate. I did not bring that up because I don't think that Measure M talked about extending council members' terms, so I didn't even want to bring that into the picture. So yeah, I'm not bringing it into the picture. That's why it's not on the slide.
Okay, so I don't really know how to proceed here. I need some advice from the attorney.
Well, I
Member
still have more in my
Cooley?
presentation, so
Okay,
I'd like to finish.
okay.
Thank you. So what a transition plan would look like for a 3-3 option and a 2-4 option. In a 3-3 option, so because currently we are operating under a 2/4 option, you do need to do a transition plan to even it out so that you're electing 3 council members in gubernatorial versus right now we're only electing 2 in gubernatorial and then moving it over to 3 in presidential versus what we're currently doing is 4 in presidential years. So what that would mean is that in the 2020 election, the 2 seats, I'll let you read it. It's a little bit confusing, but the idea is that one of the seats in the 2020 election would only be for a 2-year term, such that it would expire, and then they would join the 2 other council members in the gubernatorial year, so that now it is balanced 3 and 3. So you can read how that works, but that is just it in a nutshell. And then by 2022, everything will be balanced. So you'll have 3 council members in 2022, and then again in 2024, you'll have another 3 council members, and at that point, the transition plan here just takes 1 cycle to correct. That's it. Okay. On the 2/4 option, it may seem that it's going to be easy because we are currently in a 2/4 option, but it actually becomes extremely complex because in 2018, we elected council members, and I know the picture looks terrible on the projector here, but we elected council members from districts 2 and 3. And so you cannot, the districts, if you were to combine districts to create 3 districts, you cannot have a district that is discontiguous. So you cannot have like a District A that is split in the middle with District B. So the transition plan becomes extremely complicated because you do not want to absolve the rights of the council members that won in districts in 2018 election, and you don't want to make it unfair for them if they chose to run for re-election. So there is a way to do it, but it is extremely complex, and it would require a lot of mapping out of how you would stagger, and it would take certainly a lot more than 1 election cycle to even it out to 3 council members, or to the 2/4 option. Getting a lot of confused looks, so I'm going to pause for questions.
All right, I have a question, but districts 2 and 3 as currently defined are contiguous.
Correct. So they are contiguous. However, if we were to go to 3 districts, the likely scenario is that you would combine districts 1 and 2, and then you would combine districts 3 and 4, and then you would combine districts 5 and 6. However, if you combine districts 1 and 2, you now have to create an alternating scenario because Councilmember Chahal was elected from District 2. You see what I'm saying? And then,
Well, I totally agree. The fact that the 2-4 option says complex transition plan, I'm convinced
you get that
after
part. You get that part. Yeah. So that's
Well, I mean,
that's what I'm
already-
when I was talking about contiguity, is that you could not define districts 2 and 3 as one district and then have districts 1 and 4 be a second district, right? So that's what I meant by contiguous. No, that's okay. A good clarification question. Committee Member Cooley.
Member Cooley.
Yeah, so I guess this is for the city attorney. Would we, and either of these plans have to have the transition details in the charter language, or is this something we could just say, and the city council determines how the transition
No,
happens?
you'd have to put it into the charter.
You'd have to put it into the charter. Okay, thank you. And would it be any different from anything from like a redistricting, changing things? Because that'll happen in the future in 10 years.
We had a transition plan in Measure A, so we could figure out a way of accomplishing what your recommendation would be.
Awesome, thank you.
Member Benito.
So we are going to redraw the lines, right? We're not going to just combine districts, is that, or is that in the transition we might combine, but then later redraw, or how?
So that any redrawing of the lines is not going to be done for the March election, and it is not going to be the conversation that is had in this committee. So once the results of whatever gets put on the ballot in March happens, then we'll have to assess what that looks like. So that's not part of the discussions for today.
Makes sense, thank you.
But the court order still covers the November 2020 elections, right?
If the appeal loses,
Yeah.
yes, then the court order
understand.
will cover. If the appeal does not, if the appeal wins,
Yeah.
then then that court order goes away, and then we would go back to
The charter amendment.
at-large numbered seat elections unless
We
this
change the
measure
charter.
passes in
Yeah,
March.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, Member Rekosa.
Well, a couple things to add on that. If we're still going to do this March election regardless of what happens to the appeal?
Well, the March election is only for the charter amendment.
Right. So I'm saying, would we go with the
Once
charter
you-
amendment if we win the appeal before the March election?
Well, it'll be on the ballot for March regardless of what happens in the appeal.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
my
well,
question.
the vote will happen because we have to place it on the ballot before we even know what the result, we don't even have a hearing date scheduled.
Right, and that's, relatively speaking, that's a short amount of
I
time
mean, the
away.
court has said that they would like to get a decision out by March 10th, but that would even be after the election.
Since I have the floor, are we going to accept comments, feedback now on this, or are we going to wait for Mr. Cooley to?
I still have to go over the 6 districts options.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, so I will go to it unless there's more questions. So in 6 districts, I'll start with the right-hand side because it's easier, because it's what is currently under what we're doing with the court order. So basically, with the on the right-hand side, if you go with the 2-4 option, there's no change to what is been ordered by the court. And I will give you a sneak peek to the next slide. There's no transition plan needed, obviously, because there is no change. So if you were to decide to go to 6 districts, but then instead of a 2/4 system, you would go 3/3. This is what basically districts A, B, and C, and it could be any 3 districts. So again, for the purposes of the discussion, I'm just saying A, B, and C. Districts A, B, and C would elect 1 council member in the gubernatorial cycle, and districts D, E, and F would elect their council member in the gubernatorial cycle. Once again, not all voters get to vote for a council member in every election, and that's just by the nature of being 6 districts. And the same imbalance between gubernatorial and presidential elections applies here as well. So if you are in districts A, B, and C, clearly you have less voter turnout during your election in which you select a council member than those in D, E, and F have in their election cycle because they are in a presidential election. This was a lot easier to explain. And then, so are there any questions on here before I move over to the transition plan? Okay. In terms of the transition plan, once again, you would want to bring it over and balance it so it's 3 and 3. So one of the districts would be shortened to a 2-year term until it is back in sync. So it's similar to the prior one.
Is that it for your presentation?
That's it for what I have prepared on agenda item number 6.
Okay.
And I'd just like to comment on the transition plan. There might be a little bit of difficulty with the 4 districts, with 3 districts, with changing one of the districts to a 2-year term, depending on which one you pick, because under the charter, in terms of term limits, it doesn't contemplate a 2-year term as a successor term. So if you had an incumbent and the incumbent's district was chosen for a 2-year term, there may be questions about what would happen in terms of term limits.
But the ballot measure could incorporate
It
the
would make
term
it-
limit.
We could change the term limit
Yeah,
section on that,
Correct.
but you'd also have fights about which district, you'd have to decide,
Sure.
somebody would have to decide which district is the 2-year district.
Of course.
If the 2-year district is a district where there is no incumbent, then that problem goes away.
Yeah. Okay. Member Rekosa, did you have a question?
No, my question was still, no, I don't.
Okay. So I think at this point, I would like to hear from Member Cooley on his analysis. Do you have it that you could show it on the slides?
I'll pull it up. Give me a minute.
Okay.
Committee Member Cooley, did you change it since the last one you sent me?
No, that last one.
Okay.
It's an online link, so you should.
Yeah, I'll pull it up. Thank you.
Okay, so just the overview of what's coming up. Basically, at the last meeting, I had felt we had a lot of really good concrete points, but there was a couple of points that Member Coltman had made about the relative value of 6 members, and Professor Gobelay had made about how things perform, and I felt that they're really vague, and so I wanted to put a number to them, and so that's kind of what I went through and did, was trying to put some numbers to them so you can kind of see how much better they are than the at-large system we had, which was really bad, and how they perform relative to each other. I did pick a metric, and there are many metrics and many different ways you could analyze this. I just wanted one that kind of gave the right ballpark of what we were looking at. And I'll wait for the slides to come up then. Okay, so the second slide. So basically the number I picked here was if you had a group of voters in the city and they're all voting for the same cause, basically, what's the minimum number of votes you need in order to guarantee you get a seat. This is not the minimum you would need under all situations because you might have one group and everyone else splits their votes and so they win anyway. But if you want to say that with what you know about your group, you can guarantee to win this many seats, this is what this number is. So you can see under the old at-large system, you needed half the city, 18,000 people in a 36,000 voter city. And then I also have single-member districts. We talked about it last week up there, which needs a significantly lower number, only 3,000. And then
Excuse me. Is there any way we can get the camera pointed at the screen?
should it be on the thing?
No, it wouldn't be on the
I
video.
wouldn't worry about it. They will project that onto the live.
Oh, they
stream,
will.
so I wouldn't
Okay,
worry about
okay.
it.
Awesome. I also threw up there what a 6-member single transferable vote district would be because I know it's been talked about in the past just for people to have the numbers to see. And then the two that we had talking about this time, which was 3 districts, 2 members. Plurality means you're voting on multiple elections, so that would be the alternating. And then limited would be basically a form of multiple. The strict term of what limited means is voters vote once and multiple members are elected. And you can see the numbers vary there quite a bit. Before I dive too deep into them, you notice that all the district ones have stars on them. And the reason for that is groups perform differently. I need the next slide. Groups perform differently in districts based on how they're distributed through the city. The basic example is if you have, well, let's bring it up.
Sorry, give me a second.
Yeah. So districts don't always perform the best for all groups in all situations. The basic thing about this is if you have a group of, let's say, 10,000 people in the city and they're all in the same district, they're going to get very different results than if they're evenly split among all the different districts. There's obvious reasons for that. You could have gerrymandering, which is about intentionally it happening, but even unintentionally, the one thing about districts is if you have districts that tend to be good for a couple of groups that are voting together, other groups aren't going to be as good because it's a trade-off. There's also, I think it's been mentioned in this group before, but there's always the risk that whoever's drawing your districts thinks that the hot issue in the city is going to be the stadium, and they draw the lines so you have nice even races and trying to get fair representation on that issue, and then something comes up and people vote on a completely different issue. And the lines that were drawn for that one issue or the one voting group may not actually be relevant to how people actually vote. And that's just the reality of how districts work. So we get the next slide. So these were the actual numbers, including kind of that analysis. You see that with districts, you basically have a range depending on how your group is distributed. In the best case, on 6 single-member districts, 3,000 people will get you a seat. In the worst case, you need 18,000. You need basically half of every single district in order to get a single seat. In reality, you're going to be somewhere in between there, probably towards the lower end. So it's just when you look at districts, you have to realize that it's not, if you have 4,000 or 3,000 people in the city, you're not guaranteed a seat because they might be split up in districts in different formats. And so this was, I drew this up primarily from our discussion last time about, well, how good are things at representing? And so I thought having single-member districts and 3 districts both perform amazingly better than at the plurality at large that we had before. And you can kind of see relatively, what size of a group would be able to guarantee themselves a seat. Go to the next slide. So just very quickly to kind of define the terms I'm talking about here, when you have a citywide kind of at-large election, plurality elections, the nice thing about them is they're completely independent, which means if you want to set up a system where you have one person have a seat for 20 years and one person have a seat for 2-year term limits, or not term limits, term lengths, you could do that under that system because each seat is operating independently. You could say seat 1 has all these different rules. So it's very flexible. And also people vote multiple times. And it's also extremely simple. So that's what we had before. Single member districts, as you can see there, were much, much, much better representation and just making sure that somebody, if they have a large group in the city, or a large voting block, they can't get frozen out because they don't have 51%. They do much better on that than at large. It's also relatively simple to explain to people. It is, however, dependent on how well the districts are drawn for a particular group. And so I did want to emphasize that even if districts are drawn great for one group, they may not be drawn great for another group, and it's just the reality of districts. Limited voting, the basic premise of limited voting is you have one election that elects multiple people, and the voters are voting once, basically. So the voters vote for one person, and you either take the top two, single transferable vote, and all the things that were brought up in the last Charter Review Committee all kind of fall into that purview of, you have a lot of different ways of doing that to make it work. But the basic principle is that people are voting once and multiple people are elected. And it does do very nice things for representation. You don't have those ranges that we saw in the second slide about districts and how well the districts are drawn, and you still have multiple representatives. So the next slide. So what we've been talking about here is going to be, what's on the agenda is the multi-member districts, 3 districts with 2-member plans. And basically the 2 options I saw were either you had districts with plurality, which basically means you have 3 districts, and within each district, you're operating just like we did when we were at large, which is there are 2 independent seats that cover the same election area, and they are not really interacting. And then the other option is we could do something where we go with districts with a limited choice where people are voting in the same election and selecting multiple candidates, but multiple candidates are winning out of one election. The nice thing about this is the pros and cons that apply to the citywide system are moderated, right? So if you have a 3-district system, some of the cons of having district lines being so important to how things are drawn are less because the districts are larger and there's other things implying it. The big one actually is with limited. When you have a citywide limited, you have to figure out how to elect 6 people out of one election, which is not necessarily easy. That's why people always talk about single transferable vote and ranked choice, because it's hard to do that. When you're only electing 2, it's a lot easier to imagine systems that work without having to bring in some complexities. Next slide. So with plurality, my basic look at this was there's a massive, massive pro, which is you can vote in every election. Basically, without some form of plurality, you can't do this. You're going to have overlapping districts, people who have multiple people electing independently in order to be able to run in both elections. I know I heard it a lot, and I think a lot of people have said they've heard it a lot. This is a really valuable thing. The con is it does, this one is out of date. That should be 4,000, right? No, that's right, sorry. Yeah, so you can see it needs 6, which is actually twice as much as you would need under single-member districts, which is exactly what you would expect because the district is twice as large. So the smallest group of people who could elect someone by themselves is 6,000 people instead of 3,000 people. So it's a significant difference. Next slide. With limited, again, elects 2 members out of one election every 4 years. It can get really good performance. You can see the 4,000 there. It can be argued that it's better. There's a little bit of technicalities in that, but it's basically because the range is smaller, right? You're going to get, the worst case scenario is you need 12,000, and under all the other systems, the worst case scenario is much worse. It's 50% of the city. So there are some benefits there. The cons are, as the clerk said, you do have to figure out how to elect multiple people out of one election. That does have to be figured out. I do think with 2 members, that actually is a lot simpler. There's things that we could do that would not be reasonable at 6 people being elected at one election that you could do with 2. So it is something to be aware of. Next slide. I did include data. This is in your packet. We're not going to go over it. We're not going to go over the data, but these are percentages, and the first table looks at it on a per 1/3 of the city. And then basically you have the plurality, which is the every other election. You have the limited, which is out of one election. And then the 2 districts here is the same thing as 6 districts citywide. So it's just what the percentages look like for that. Next slide. And this is just the data breakdown. So if anyone wants to look at the data breakdown, I want to ask the question of what I mean by this. That was like for each seat, what percentage you would need to win. I'm not going to go into it. It's not really important except for anyone who wants details. So next slide. So this was me putting up an example of a fictional city with 36,000 voters. And I'm going to say that there was some polarizing issue that came in at one point, and everyone on the next election voted based on it. And 40% of the city voted on one issue. In this case, I said, it's a fountain city, and the fountain was turned out to be poisoned. And one group wants to put in expensive filters on the fountain, and the other group doesn't want to do that. They want to do something else. So if they get 40%, what does that mean? You can see with the at-large, you get 0. With 6 districts, it's anywhere from 0 to 4, and 3 districts is 0 to 4 or 1 to 3. So just so you kind of a concrete vision of what would happen based on a city that actually does 40% voting on one basically group of people who want one thing and 60% voting the other way. And that's all I have. I'm welcome to answer any questions about this. My primary interest in this was so that when we have our conversation, any conversation we have about 6 districts, we can at least quantify what the difference is about how much worse performance there is. And any conversation we have between the two of these when we're saying how important alternating each election is, we can weigh that against what it cost. Because there is a cost here, clearly. And I wanted to make sure we had something to fall back on and how much things actually cost. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Do any members have any comments on either of the 2 presentations that you saw? Yes, Member Ricosa.
I'd like to, because it was going back to the very first slide, I'm very concerned about that bullet point that said made it easier to elect a minority. I didn't see anything in any presentation that would lead to that conclusion. So can somebody clarify on that?
I think the city attorney corrected my bullet point. I think the focus is not about making it easier to elect a minority. I think what Committee Member Cooley is saying, what percentage of voters are needed to elect a council member of their choice, if I'm not mistaken.
So if you go back to slide either 2 or 4.
Then
Sure,
can
I can
we
do that.
essentially
Yeah.
strike that bullet then?
I can do that, sure. I mean, I don't know what we'll have to do in terms of just the post-meeting material, but we'll do that. I'll rephrase the bullet, as our city attorney said, not to talk about making it easier for minorities to be elected, but I think the intent of what I was trying to say is that the threshold to guarantee a council member of your choice is lowered. So that's kind of what I was.
Of course, was the Voting Rights Act. That was a major point of the lawsuit. But can we go back to that first slide?
Which one?
3 districts, 3/3.
Got it.
And you're accepting comments on opinions?
You want his first slide or
No,
mine?
your first slide, sorry.
And I just edited it live right there for you.
Well, so I have to say that the left side, the 3-3 option, is almost infinitely better than anything else. It's completely clean. Everybody votes every time. Number 1. Number 2, you don't have to worry about any runoff methods or ranked choice voting because there isn't a multiple people running for multiple seats in the same election. It is completely clean. And on the second slide for the transition, you don't have that complex transition plan that the 3-3 option, 3 districts, is about completely clean and about the best you can get. And the thing we've learned right from the previous election is when you're going to the voters at large, you've got to keep what you're doing simple. It's got to be simple and understandable and clean. And the 3 districts, 3-3 option fulfills that.
Any other members have any comments on either of the 2 presentations? Okay, at this point, I would like to open it up to the public, and I would first like to start with Dr. Gobele. Would you explain to us what retrogressing is?
First of all, I'd like to apologize if I stated things unclearly on Saturday, because I intended to say that I'm not a lawyer. I think I remember saying that I'm not an attorney, I'm a demographer. And I've been a demographer doing redistricting work since 1990. And among the things I've learned over the years is that it's really important to get legal advice. And one of the questions that I had in my mind was the question of whether changing from the court-ordered plan to having 3 council districts, going from 6 to 3 council districts, might be legally interpreted as retrogressing. And I think I said that you needed legal advice on this subject, and fortunately you do have legal advice here this evening. So this question of retrogression mainly applied to jurisdictions under the Federal Voting Rights Act that changed from at-large to single-member districts and then want to cut back on the number of districts that they have, and that was called retrogression under some applications of the Federal Voting Rights Act, including the pre-clearance requirement now set aside.
Thank you. Would the attorney like to weigh in on that?
Sure. The only comment I would have is that this case, the case against Santa Clara, was not decided under the Federal Voting Rights Act case and could not have been, we could not have been found liable under the Federal Voting Rights Act case, because one of the preconditions is that you can draw a district that with minority majority, and under the Voting Rights Act, California Voting Rights Act, you can't. That's not one of the preconditions for a finding of violation. Obviously, I disagreed with even a finding of violation of the other prongs of the necessary under the California Voting Rights Act. But I can see that if a case had been decided under the federal act where you could have had a minority majority district drawn, and then you went to a larger district where that diluted the power of that single district, then I could see where there's a regression argument. But here we don't even have that, because we don't have them. We never drew a district that could be a minority majority district. The court did not do that. And number two, if you were to adopt the 3-3 option and you joined 2 of the 6 districts that the court did draw, and they had similar demographic mixes to each other, then the overall demographic mix of that single district would function from a Voting Rights Act standpoint very similarly to a single 6-member, a 1/6 district and the 1/3 district if they had the same demographics. Since you were running a single-member district election, I don't see where there would be much difference in terms of any kind of Voting Rights Act issues.
I see your point, simply because of the way the demographics of Santa Clara are, but the Federal Voting Rights Act does apply to Santa Clara. Is that correct?
Well, every election in the United States is subject to the Federal Voting Rights Act.
Correct. I
But
just wanted-
whether there would be any liability for any election in Santa Clara, I don't
understand.
think it would.
I understand. Okay. All right. Any other member of the public? Mr. Chesson, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, can we start the 3-minute clock?
Thank you. Again, Steve Chesson, President of Californians for Electoral Reform. The handout I've got has basically 2 parts, comments on the transitions. And actually, if you let your new districts, your 3-district plan, go into effect in 2022 after the new census data is out, your transition to 3 districts, 2 seats per district, or what I guess you're calling a 2-4 option, is actually easier. I think the plan presented by the clerk was overly complicated. And your transition to 3 districts, 2 districts per seat, 2 seats per district, where each district elects 1 person every 2 years, is a little bit complicated, but not very much. The second part of my handout is a different way of presenting the data that Commissioner Cooley presented, basically to show that when you're electing 6 single-member districts, assuming a population of 36,000 people, to guarantee a win, it takes 3,001 votes. And then if you go to 3 2-member districts, then depending upon which model you use, if you use the alternating model, it would take 6,001 votes to win a seat. If you go to both at once, using plurality voting, then it will take 6,001 votes only if people bullet vote. If they don't bullet vote, but distribute their votes, you actually need to guarantee 8,001 voters in order to win a seat. It actually takes more under plurality. But if you use the limited voting option, then it would only take, or a single transferable vote, then it would only take 4,001 votes to get a seat. And then finally, I wanted to respond to a comment that Commissioner Coulterman made earlier today about the California Voting Rights Act. The California Voting Rights Act does not care how many people you elect from a district, whether you elect 1 or 2 or 70. All it says is that as long as no members of the council are elected citywide, then you cannot be sued under the CVRA. So a 3-district plan with 2 people in each district, whether they're both elected at the same time or whether they're elected in alternating years, alternating cycles, doesn't matter. It is just as immune to the CVRA lawsuit as your current 6-district plan is. There's an argument that could be made that because you have an at-large mayor, you're still not in the safe harbor of the CVRA. And either a 6-district, the current 6-district plan, or even though it was approved by a court, someone else could come along and file a CVRA suit against you because you have an at-large mayor. Thank you.
Thank
If you have
you.
any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any other member of the public like to speak?
Hi, good evening.
Please state your name and if you live in the city of Santa Clara.
Yeah, hi, good evening. Bob O'Keefe, resident of, homeowner and resident of Santa Clara, right here in District 5. First of all, I want to thank every member of this committee for your time and your commitment to this. I've watched every meeting that you've had, and obviously there's been a lot of work and effort put in by each and every one of you, so thank you very much. Secondly, I'm glad that we're finally talking about some districts and what they look like. For me, I like the 3-district, 3-3 option. With everything stated up there, there's a couple other benefits that it includes or may include. When you have two members per district, when you elect both at the same time, you have 2 new members coming into council sitting up there. They might have a lot of experience within the city, but they may never have governed within the city. This way, at least you'll have 1 member in each district that has at least 2 years sitting on council that can guide and mentor the new person. I don't mean a junior and a senior member, but it's just something to work out. Each district has specific little nuances to itself. District 5, we have the university, a future downtown to be built. Northside has, a stadium, and all the other districts have something else. These 2 people would have a lot of knowledge on what's been happening in that district, and then not only when they're elected, but when they leave, they're taking that knowledge with them. So I would like to see the 3-district, 2 members, and vote each 2 years, gubernatorial and presidential. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other, please step forward.
Hi, so I'm Rick Rafey. I'm a homeowner here. I know a few of you. I have no agenda. I came in just to learn what the heck this is all about. I do like the notion of diversity. I like the conversation you guys had clarifying what we're really trying to achieve and not that in exactly cultural terms, for instance. But I think that actually brings up an interesting issue, is like what diversity means would be completely rooted in something unclear and arbitrary. Like that could be a zone, like who's near the stadium. It could be on economics, making poor people better equipped to have a voting block, or it could be based on culture. And so I really liked what Teresa Sulzer mentioned at the beginning of just something that gives you kind of a legislative breakdown where people can actually speak to, if there are going to be some alternatives on a ballot, like, or in these meetings. There's lots of pros and cons, but it gets really complicated really fast, even for very smart people. And I don't even know, like we jumped right into this moving to 3, and I never knew why we were even moving from 6 to 3, but it sounds good from some of the conversations. But then again, I thought Dr. Coulterman made some really good points about why 6 is good. And so I haven't heard anything about why we're moving to 3. And that's a great case for pros and cons. But it also introduces a risk around fairness of what the boundaries are based on. And it seems like a really big risk based on what Mr. Cooley said. I mean, there's intentional, like, okay, now we're going to try to get this particular block having a vote. And then there's unintentional, which I thought was a really savvy point. And literally, that's what you've introduced by having districts. And I know that we're trying to achieve court things. I'm almost done. Let me just last few points. So what is the basis we've used so far, and how are these for setting districts? Because I know we have 6 now, and I really wasn't paying a lot of attention to how those got set, but I trust people generally. And how are these boundaries officially set? I really like the idea of, not having a block that can make that decision, but having voter input and stuff. It should be simple. I loved the point that the last speaker made, or the speaker before, and it shouldn't have, we shouldn't have arbitrary districts based on different election cycles due to the turnout point. I think, like I liked what the last person said, because that's another exposure that goes away from that. And just looking at your model, if I followed your math, the 3-3 does look good. It actually came closest to the percentage of the Fountain people. Basically, it was like 40% of the Fountain people were in, that was one of the 3-3, one of those kind of fell into that. And I also just was curious, does the ballot change? I think it does not. If you have all these, like one district has one candidate or whatever. Anyway, I've gone my 3 minutes, I'm pretty sure, but just.
Okay. Thank you. We actually will be making a recommendation to council on drawing district lines. That's item number 8 on the agenda, so we will be talking about that. Yeah, Member Cooley.
Yeah, just because you had some questions about what's going on. Before this all started, we were on an at-large system with 6 people being elected from the entire city. There was a court order that we're under that's moved us to 6 single-member districts, but that was never in the charter. So what's going on right now is we're saying what should be in our constitution of the city, basically. And so we're not moving away from 6 districts as much as we're currently operating under an interim plan, and the decision has to be, do we adopt the interim plan? Do we adopt a different plan? What we don't want to stay under what we previously had, and that is very clear. Hopefully that clears that up.
Okay, any other member of the public like to speak on this?
Yeah, Anthony Becker, resident of Santa Clara. When I look at this, the three district options, 3-3, 2-4, it just gets more and more complicated to me. It gets more and more diluted. And if you think that, I feel single member districts, 6 districts, is going to be easier for people to elect their own district council members. Last election, you had people who are able to outspend you. And when you go to single member districts, it's easier for people who are, financially strapped to be able to run for office, not just special interests. But when I see the 3-3 option, you're able to have 2 council members in a district, that's an option for somebody, a developer. So if we go back into 2016, we have Blue Pack, we have 49ers, and we also have developers. You could end up buying 2 council members in this district model right here. If you go to 6 districts, it's easier for people to run. Try walking a whole entire city. It's a lot of work. At large didn't work. 6 districts will work. So when I see on the final slide where it just shows 6 districts and the options we have, we can keep the same model we have now, which is electing based on the process we have now, which we just did with Councilmember Chahal and Councilmember Hardy. We can keep that same model. And if we do that same model, essentially it's making your job and everyone's job easier instead of going in there and diving in and micromanaging another election system that could eventually probably get us into more trouble down the road. 6 districts, an elected mayor is perfect. 6 districts is easier. It's easier for campaigning, it's easier for meeting the people, and you're more accountable for the people that vote for you. If you go to 2, yeah, it sounds great. 3 districts, the 3 option looks great. But what you're creating, though, is you're creating blocks. And you're creating the option of people, if you're all worried about the 49ers, if you're all worried about developers buying candidates, this one is going to create that again, just like we had in 2016, just like we had in 2018, 2010, and so on. It's a repeating pattern. You want to break up cliques, you want to break up an empire, you go with 6 districts. Look what's happening in San Jose. It's working. It's working. Yes, they get blocks, but there's opportunities for better voices and more minorities. And it's not just about race, it's not just about our color, it's about how much money we make, it's about what areas we live in the city. Diversity is a multiple, you could use that word on many, many levels. So look at this in the respect of everybody should have a voice. 6 districts is the option. This, like I said, it's creating more complication. You're making your jobs even harder when already the judge said 6 districts. And my last point, the census is coming up. They're going to adapt the districts.
Thank you. Any other member of the public? Okay, okay. Step forward. State your name. Do you live in the city of Santa Clara? Yes, he does. I know.
My name is Kevin Park. I live in the city of Santa Clara. Don't know for how long. Anyway, I think, like, I don't care about race on city council. I don't care about representation other than we have good representation. The problem is when we don't have good representation, that's when I want a good voting system. And I think the thing that we should be looking at is how do we get good voting, or how do we get a good result? And the opinion is, when you do it mathematically, it doesn't matter how you break up the districts if you use the same voting system. Meaning you can always come up with an example of where with a single vote, first past the post, you will have minority candidates in a minority district lose. For example, if you have an incumbent, and that incumbent gets some amount of the vote, and you've got 4 candidates of the racial minority, those 4 candidates may split the vote and allow the incumbent, or allow a person not of that minority or that representation to win. And what you're going to see is this is going to become a bigger issue. I think that nationwide, when we start looking at a proportional vote, it will become a big issue. And right now, we're seeing in Santa Monica. Santa Monica was in the middle of CVRA, and they are fighting the CVRA based on the first past the post voting. I think they are pushing a proportional vote, and they have a pretty good legal challenge on that as well. And I think that we should look at these things. But by not allowing the committee to address different voting systems, you are limiting our options and leaving us open to a future lawsuit. And I think it may not be a future lawsuit based on today's standards, but I think it will be a future lawsuit based on the emerging standards, which are not looking at racial diversity, well, they are, but not looking at like making things simple. It's looking at how do we get the best representation. And again, we can use race as a discriminator, but it's not about race. You can look at other voting systems. Like I keep saying this, the New Zealand flag referendum, that is not even about race. It was about a preference for what the flag should look like. And then you see in those things where it's not racially polarized, it's just about a preference on a design, you can see how it's harder to game that system versus the system today. And if we're not going to look at what these things are, then I feel like we're just going to, it doesn't matter if we have 6, 5, 7, it doesn't matter how many districts we have, we're going to have the same problem. And I would say for anyone that's listening out there that's a lawyer, that if this happens and we have issues with the voting system, I would love to be involved in the next lawsuit. Thank you.
Okay, any other member of the public? Okay, we're closing public hearing. Now, the way I would like to work this, because this is basically the meeting where we're going to recommend to the attorney for what to draft that we will adopt at the next meeting. So at this point, I would like for us to decide on the number of districts. So does anyone have a motion? Or is there a discussion? Yeah. Yes, Member Cooley.
Yeah, so I tried to keep my opinion out of my slides, so I'm going to say it now. One, I did want to comment off of what Kevin had said. I know a lot about ranked choice voting and I'm all over it, but my impression on this group was we didn't want to dive into that, which I think is perfectly fair for right now. I do note that the options listed for the 3 districts, both of them will work fine with ranked choice, should ranked choice come up as a different measure in the future. Particularly limited voting does work with that, so does obviously having a single district and you can do ranked choice. There are things out there that wouldn't, but these all do work for that. I think both of these have their pros and cons. I've heard very deeply that people like voting in every election. However, I do have a major concern about if we go with the 3-3 option. It is an entirely fair way to describe it as you have 2 members being elected at large within the 1/3 district, because it works within the district. It works identical to how our old system worked across the whole city, in the sense that 2 people are being elected completely independently over the same electoral body. And I think it's a very fair criticism. And I don't want to say it'll open up to legal challenge, but it definitely opens us to a rhetorical challenge of essentially you are doing the same thing as what was happening before, and that was bad. In the sense of just structurally, like, going with a 3-3 system means that the 2 people you're electing have this, it's on a smaller scale, but the same problem is what we had citywide, which is the same electorates electing multiple members of the council that way. So that is a major concern. So just going off of when you look at what happens on the math, I do think it's a concern that, you know, you need 6,000 people to get guaranteed a seat in that. I'm actually kind of in both of those kind of work for me, but I would prefer doing a 2-4 option because of that difference.
Okay.
Just from a legal standpoint, you're talking about a 3-3 with a 2-4 option?
No, I'm talking about a 3-3 with you vote in every election. So
just on the point that you were trying to suggest that in terms of some kind of legal infirmity with that, the 2-4 option is much more like an at-large election with 2 members running in a single district. The one where you have 3-3, where it alternates, where you're only electing 1 person per district each election, functionally that election is functional as a single member district. So the 2-4 option is more like what we were doing before from an at-large standpoint.
I understand the legal distinction you're making there, and it makes perfect sense to me. Okay. But from a representational standpoint, the results of how well the results represent the city and represent populations in the city, the 3-3 option is more like the at-large system. I understand that it's not a legal distinction, but it is.
I think there are arguments in terms of, and whether it's relevant, it's to a legal challenge, are 2 different things. But there are similarities in one that are not present in the other, and vice versa. So, and it does depend on how you elect the 2 people at each election in each district.
We are at 8:30, and we have basically half the agenda left. So I would like to have a quick discussion on this and then take a vote. So does any other member have any comments on this? Is there a motion?
There's a comment over here.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I like the 3-3 option. I really like to see people voting every cycle. I think that it's hard. Look how many people we have in the city and the small percentage we have voting. I think that anything you do to keep people from voting is a bad thing. So I really like this. People are more engaged. Every 2 years or every year and a half, they start getting their information. I think, whether it's is it better for the person running, or I think it really needs to be what's better for the city. And I really think that the 3-3 works out better, because I think it keeps people more engaged in what's going on with the city. Thank you.
Any other, Member Ricosa?
Well, just to understand, we first want to vote on how many districts, 6 or 3, and then vote on which option within that one?
We can certainly do that, yeah.
Okay, okay.
All right. So is there a motion? Would you like to make a motion?
Can I make a motion that we adopt the 3 districts?
Okay, there's a second made by Member Ricosa, seconded by Almazal. Okay, so the way we'll do this is as we did it before. All those in favor of 3, raise your hands now. and then we'll vote on 6. So all those,
Sorry, just to be clear, this is just for 3 districts. This is not about the option within the 3 districts.
we're going to have another motion for that.
Got it. I just wanted to clarify from the maker of the motion.
Once we pass that, then we go to option.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you have a comment?
No, you said
Okay.
raise your hand.
Okay, so all those in favor of 3, raise your hands. Okay, that's 5. All those in favor of 6? Same as last time? Okay, did you get those?
I don't understand, wasn't that an up or down vote, a yes or no vote?
Yeah, I think it needs to be yes
can't-
or no, and then
you
a
can't
separate
vote for
motion
something
for
else.
6.
Yeah, you can't vote for 6.
Oh, yeah, no on 6. Yeah, no on 3, okay, that would be fine. Okay, would you like to make a motion on 6?
Yeah, and I know that 5 people have voted for 3, but for the record, I want to make a motion in favor of 6 districts. So I need a second.
I'll second it. Okay, all those in favor of 6? Opposed? Okay. All right, that was for the record. All right, now we'll move on to, since 3 districts passed, we'll move on to which option, the 3-3 or the 2-4 option. So is there a motion?
I vote for the 3-3 option. I move for the 3-3 option.
I second it.
Okay, moved by Ricosa, seconded by Benito. All right, all in favor of the 3-3 option, raise your hands. Okay, that's 5 of us. Okay. And then opposed to the 3-3 option? It's 2? Okay. Do you have all those? Okay. All right, so that essentially passed. Would anyone like to make a motion on the 2-4, or is that moot?
I mean,
Okay.
Sure, I'll move we do it, but I don't think we're going to get more than 5 votes.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay, fails.
I would, there were 2 presented transition options that I saw that were functional. There was the one from the clerk, which was essentially that someone serve a 2-year term. And then there was the one that Steve put up, which was basically, I think, someone serve a 6-year term, if I recall.
No,
The
you were
two-
saying that based on the redistricting,
Oh, with 3 districts, there's still a transition plan.
there's a transition plan. There's a
Yeah.
2-year.
If this is going to be a direction to the attorney, I need to understand what a 6-year term meant. I don't know.
No, I thought I must have misread it. But there's, at some point, in order to get the seats lined up, something has to happen, right?
Can I suggest that you leave that for me and the city attorney to work out, to bring to the next meeting? I think the transition plan, it depends a lot about what happens with the appeal or doesn't happen to the appeal. I don't know for sure, but we do have to discuss that. And then,
I think you could still give us a sentiment of what you'd like to see.
yeah, but I would avoid going into the details, because whether we're going to do that in 2020 or start in 2022, I do need to discuss that with the city attorney. So maybe if you give us some direction, but I don't know if we necessarily, like, let us bring that back, and then we can have that as part of the main discussion in the October meeting. That's what I would suggest. Obviously, you guys are free to.
I personally am fine to let you guys figure it out, but does anyone have any strong opinions on the committee?
I just thought we had 2 different options presented, and I don't know, maybe they're the same thing. Okay.
Yeah, so, I mean, the other thing is I haven't had a chance to look at what Steve Chesson, I'm trying to read it, but I'm trying to pay attention to the meeting at the same time. So, I mean, if you guys want to pause for 10 minutes, but we're already at 8:30, so, I mean, that's why I would just suggest, if you just let us figure, if your direction is that you want something where at some point some council member is going to have to serve a 2-year term, and then we'll go figure out what the details of that look like to get us to a 3-3 plan, then we'll certainly do that.
And you'll look at how that impacts term limits and all of that?
Yeah.
Okay,
sure.
okay. All right, now we're moving on to item number 7. Is there a staff presentation?
I do have, just put to help guide the discussion, I did not put any suggestions, but I did put to guide the discussion from what I heard last Saturday, some of the questions that you might want to answer or discuss as a committee, just to help guide the discussion, but this is the only slide I have with regards to the residency requirements agenda item. So you're free to read it. Basically, it's just the comment or the thoughts that you were all discussing on Saturday is what happens to a sitting council member during their term if they move out the city. So what do you want to do with regards to that? If in the middle of their term they move out of their district but remain in the city, and there is a scenario where the redistricting happens and they get redistricted out of their district while they are still serving. So that is a more narrow case, but it still is a possibility. So those are the three questions that I think, just to help guide the discussion and to move it along, are the ones that you might want to consider for discussion.
Okay.
Tim, I have a question.
Yes.
I'm curious if what standard is used for policemen, firemen, support people in the city who are supposed to live in the city, but they move out or they have to, and there's no requirement.
We don't have requirements for
Okay.
anybody to live in the city except elected officials.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Member Colterman.
So I would like to see us first state that in order to run for council or mayor, that a candidate must prove residency in the district they're running in, and for mayor, of course, in the city at large, before we discuss residency requirements after the person is elected, should something happen, like such as what's on the list for, right on the, that we can see.
We already have language in the charter that says the mayor must live in the city. So that's taken care of. And then we do have language that I can just bring over that I wrote for Measure A that said you had to be a resident of the district in order to run. So I can bring that language forward.
Member Ricosa.
I assume that on that subject, I assume somebody moving out of the city is already in the charter because that can already happen, or is it not?
It's actually in the state code about when somebody's no longer eligible because of not living in the city, about how you determine that. And there's numerous attorney general opinions about what it means to no longer be a resident of the city, because you have all kinds of different situations where, one person's spouse may move away, and then there's questions about whether that person, it's not an easy question to answer. You could start creating charter language about that if you want to do that, but then you'd have a charter amendment that had a lot of stuff in it that would complicate the issue. But I do think the other questions about what happens, you move out of a district, that's something I think you could definitely, that be worth talking about, yeah.
Member Cooley.
So my understanding is we decided you had to be in the district at the last meeting, so I don't think we have to rehash that. Looking at all these are very important. I think what we have in front of us basically is if we want to, we could say you have to be a member of the district when you get elected, and that's what's written in and nothing else, which means if they move, won't be a problem until next time they get run. And then we don't have to answer any of these questions. If the committee wants to go that direction, it becomes very easy. We just instruct the attorney that, the language should be, obviously leave the requirement to be in the city for everyone, and you must be in your district, resident of your district when you get elected. If we want to do something more complicated, like if you move out when you are in the district and we want to change those, make those rules, I think that's when we have to have some detailed discussion on that. But just from a high level perspective, if we're going to go the way of just saying it's only when you get elected, then we don't need to really dive into any of these details because it covers all of them. So just as a thought of, we should decide that first, and if the answer is details, then we can do it.
Member Ricosa.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I would just add for items 2 and 3 is that the simple answer would be you're allowed to serve out your term to which you were elected, but the next term, then you'd be subject to the new districting residency requirements. But you'd always be allowed to serve out your term. And I think that's kind of what you're saying.
So I read the FAQ for the city of Menlo Park, and if you move out of the district, you have to resign. That's immediately. That is what the Menlo Park says.
They're going very strong.
It's the same as, I guess, the state requirement that if you move out of the city, you're supposed to resign.
Okay, so Menlo Park is a general law city, so, but from a charter standpoint, we could decide differently if we want to.
It's just how they, I'm giving you an example of what another city has done. It's not, and I don't know, do you have any idea of what our neighbors have done? Sunnyvale and well, they're moving in that direction. And, other cities around us, what have they done?
I haven't looked into that.
Just from my experience of having worked at the city of San Jose, the council members just simply don't move. I mean, you sometimes have issues with redistricting every 10 years, but generally speaking, I mean, the whole idea of being a district representative is you want to be close to your voters. I mean, if you want to be reelected, you're going to stay in your district. It doesn't seem to happen very often. I don't recall it ever happening in San Jose where a person elected from a district then moved to another district. I just didn't see it happen.
Okay, I would like to have a discussion about what happens. I guess, I don't know, what I'm hearing is that people are like, it only matters when you get elected, and then after that. So presumably if the lines were redistricted, then we need to have that discussion as to whether your next election after you get redistricted, you're not living in that district anymore.
Didn't Steve bring a suggestion forward that we go with that you have to live in the district when you're elected, and if we went with that, then the rest of them are moot? I mean, are we going to vote on that? I was under the impression we were going to take a vote on that.
Just to clarify my recommendation, which was basically, if we're going for simplicity, then that would be the simplest requirement that does not, we don't have to put any special language in anything. I think that's a perfectly fine argument. I think it's perfectly fine to argue that we should have more complexity, but if simplicity is the goal, I think that would be a way of doing that.
Okay, so is there a motion?
You want the public talk?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, members of the
I
public.
want to make one comment about the scenario, if you were to consider it, where if somebody moved out, they would be forced to resign. Keep in mind that the charter has language about when there is a vacancy, how you fill that vacancy. So clearly, we're going through that right now with the chief of police vacancy, and we had gone through that very recently with the vacancy on the city council. So if you were to force a resignation, you would have to follow that process to fill that vacancy as well. So keep that in mind as you're going through the discussion.
Okay, any member of the public like to speak on this item? Step forward, please.
Steve Chesson, President of Californians for Electoral Reform. I just want to make a distinction between two, which is a voluntary vacating a district versus number 3, which is an involuntary vacating of the district. For general law cities, you are not allowed to shorten the term of someone who has the district drawn out from under them, because it's only fair. It's not their fault that the district was removed. Clearly, as a charter city, you can do what you want, but my recommendation would be to follow the same guidance that applies for general law cities. As for number 2, I was in the process of looking up what the city of San Jose does. I haven't gotten that yet, but if you'll permit me to come back to the mic when I find that, I'd be happy to tell you what the San Jose city charter says about people who move out of their district.
Okay, you have 2 minutes left. You can come back.
Thank you.
All right. Any other member of the public?
Hi, Bob O'Keefe again, and I'm still a resident of Santa Clara. This question was one of the main reasons why I came here tonight. I believe in the charter right now, if we're going to be changing the language, it should be set clear of what the requirement is to be an elected official, in this case a council member, since that's all we're talking about here. I believe the charter states that all elected officials must be a registered elector of the city. And I don't know exactly what that means. I don't know if that means that you have to be registered with the voter registration at your address in the city. But it needs to be restated that you must be a registered elector in the district that you're running for. But prior to that, before it even gets to, because this is all talking about when you're elected, the section needs to state when you're running for office. prior to being elected. Because what happens if you're not a resident of the city, you get elected and you're not a resident of the city? There's nothing in law that's going to take that vote away from you. So it needs to be from the get-go, from the moment that you file your papers to run for office, you need to be the registered elector of the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Chesson.
I found what the Charter of San Jose, basically you're going to look at sections 403, 404, and 405. You have to be a resident of the district at least 30 days prior to the filing of papers in order to run. You have to remain a resident of the district while you're in office. If you move out of the district, you lose your seat, except, of course, if the district gets moved out from under you, you still are allowed to finish your term. So that's what San Jose does, and it would be very appropriate for the city of Santa Clara to adopt similar policies.
Okay, yeah, Member Coulterman, do you have? Well, you had a comment on what he was saying, right?
I had a comment on Steve Chesson.
Yeah, so, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I really like the idea of being a resident for 30 days, having experienced in District 3 someone moving into the district like days before filing papers to run, and then being subjected to an extremely negative campaign by that person. I think that if we have to prove in order to use the senior center, we have many requirements for proving residency in order to get that card. I think we should not expect less of candidates where they can just move into the city and file papers within a matter of a couple of days.
If I could clarify it, because I want to make sure it's clear. It says that they have to be a resident of the district for at least 30 days immediately preceding the last day specified by law for the filing of nomination
Makes
papers.
sense, yeah.
So you count from the last day of filing, and you go back 30 days, and they have to be a resident for at least that long length of time.
Got it. Any other member of the public? State your name and whether you're a resident.
So I don't even think I have to state my name, to be honest. I think that not legally required to do that. Yes. Wear my T-shirt inside out, and I could be Tim. So I like the residency requirement, and I think that, again, to be a legal registered voter, you must have a permanent residence in the precinct for which you are registered, and that would be tying you to a district or tying you to the city. I like the 30 days. I also think it's a bad idea to allow somebody to keep the office when they've moved out of the city, right? Unless the intent is for them to keep the permanent residence, and be registered within that district. For example, they could lose their house in a fire. Something else could happen. There are lots of things that could happen. But one of the reasons that you don't want to let somebody keep their office when they leave is that's how you game the system. Somebody moves into a district with the idea that I want to run for this district, win the election, and then move out of the district, which was their intent. And we want to prevent these kinds of games. And therefore, I think that having just the legal registered voter requirement that you must be a permanent resident in the precinct for which you are registered, and if that precinct is not in your district, then you do not have your seat. I think that's a good requirement. Right.
Any other member of the public? Okay. Now we can have a discussion and a motion. Does anyone like to make a motion or a discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to move for Benjamin. I'd like to move for Benjamin's simplicity scenario that he mentioned earlier. You want to restate that?
Yeah. So I would suggest a motion to require residency in the district at election and during the running, which I guess would be from the filing. So we put that in there saying you have to be a resident from when you file to when you take office, and that will take care of at least the initial part, and this can be revisited later if it needs to be by a later committee. Does that make enough sense for it to be a direction?
No, sorry.
Okay,
No,
so-
can I just read you the language, the current language in the charter?
Sure.
And tell me how you'd like to change that? And just assume, so currently it says, "No person shall be eligible to hold any elective office in the city, including mayor, city council, police chief, chief of police department, and city clerk, unless he or she is a resident and qualified registered elector of the city." When we did Measure A, we just paralleled that language for the district and said, so you had to be a resident of the district and a qualified registered elector of the city. So that's how I would bring it back, unless you want to tell me something else.
I would think.
Because the thing about the election day, because then what happens is if you say, if you have something else, I mean, obviously,
So I
it
would
says eligible to hold the office. So technically speaking, what it says is right now, if you don't change the charter language and only and then make parallel language for a district, that would mean that you're required to stay in that district to be a member, to be a resident of that district, and be a resident, if you're the mayor, resident of the city, for the entire time you're holding office, which is very similar to what everybody else does. The question happens is, if someone actually does move, how do you determine whether they've really moved or not, whether they're a bona fide resident of somewhere else? That's really the issue. And then our city has no way of there's no way for anybody to go to somewhere in the city and say, hey, you moved, you can't be the council member anymore. You'd have to go to court through some kind of process, and then there's all kinds of attorney general opinions and things like that. So we currently don't have within the charter, within the city process, of removing someone who got elected and then moved.
Okay, so my recommendation, Richard, would be that we request that we add a section for that you must be a resident of the district in order to stand for an election for that district. I think that would be nice and simple, and we can just avoid all these issues.
What if you move out of the city?
Well, I would not change the current charter language says you must be a member of the city to be elected. I would not change that, right? The language you just
It says
said,
to hold office.
you must be a member or a resident of the city, right? That's what it
To
says.
hold the office,
Yes.
not just to be elected.
Yes.
So you
I'm
want to
saying
change the current charter
leave the
language?
requirements for the city. Don't change that at all.
Okay.
Just add an additional requirement to say to stand for election in a district, you must be a resident of that district.
But it already says that.
No, it doesn't. It just says you have to be a resident of the city, right?
No, I'll change it. No, I'll bring back to the
Parallel it.
district, just parallel language. What I don't want to do is soften the language that we're currently using, which requires you to be a member of the district for the whole time you're in the district, for the whole time you've been
That is the
elected.
suggestion, is to soften it so that the requirement is just you have to be so that you have to be a resident of the district to stand, and obviously the requirement on the city would stay the same no matter what. Because I think that would let us avoid these issues.
Then I'm confused.
So I think what he's saying is that if you move within the city, you can continue to hold your office. If you move out, no, that's what Ben is saying. That's what Ben is saying. Yes, but we're trying to explain what Ben wants.
I will write whatever you tell me to write. I just want to understand what it is you want me to write. Right now, unless you tell me differently, and so I need the exact words of what you want to tell me differently, is I would write a similar statement to, hold on. Is there a way of making this pop up on the screen?
Yeah, just so we don't have to deal with it.
Let's see the language. I do better if I.
But they should stay in the city. So they should stay in the city. If someone's going to play that game within the city,
It's Charter Section
we'll deal with it,
600.
right? You know.
Yeah, we do do it. Yeah, so I mean, you're right. It's an unenforceable thing, so why put all kinds of crap on it?
Yeah.
Okay, makes sense. Exactly. Because they couldn't. Oh, yeah, right, exactly what Brian,
We have the language there, so, okay, would you read the language?
Okay, this is section 600 of the charter, so it currently reads, no person shall be eligible to hold any elective office in the city, including the mayor, city council, chief of police department, and city clerk, unless he or she is a resident and qualified registered elector of the city. For Measure A, I wrote a second sentence that said, no person shall be eligible to hold the district, no council member shall be eligible to hold the council office unless he or she is a resident and resident of the district and a qualified registered elector of the city. Something like that.
I think the motion is, instead of doing that, leave that language there, so you still have to be a member of the city. In order to be qualified, you must be a resident of the city, and then add the new language that we're adding for the district would be, in order to stand for a district election, you must be the resident or qualified
Okay,
registered
so
elector.
you'd have a second sentence that said, no person shall be eligible to be elected to the office of council member unless they are a resident of the district.
Yes, and that would let us avoid some of the complexities of redistricting and all that.
I second that. Let's get moving.
All right, but you'd still have the question of what happens if they move, because currently, all right, so this would mean they could move anywhere in the city.
Yes, that's what
In
he
the city.
wants. That's what he wants.
Okay.
In the city, yes.
Brian,
So-
there's no teeth to it anyway, right? I mean, it's just as if they were to move out of the city, you know, you got to get the attorney general involved, you know, I mean, my God.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. I get it.
That's the
All right,
motion.
so that's the motion?
Yeah.
Is there a second? Oh, a comment, Mr. Silva.
Yeah, let's not forget the survey. 94.5% of the people that voted wanted people to live in their district. So keep that in consideration, too.
Yeah.
So if they move out of their district, it kind of, it's going against that, I believe.
Okay, Member Coltman.
Yeah, I think if you are going to run in a district, obviously if it's redistricted out from under you, you should be able to finish your term. But people should live within the district. If they make a commitment and they want to run for that district, then don't move out of that district during your term of office. I like the language that Mr. Chesson read that San Jose has. I also like the 30 days prior to the end of the filing deadline, so we don't have this people moving in 2 days before issue that we saw in the 2018 election.
I agree with Ms. Coleman.
Member Cooley.
So I understand the motion, the idea. My understanding of what practically is going to happen here is, obviously you have the redistricting situation, or you might have someone who's arranging a move. Let's say they move 3 months before the end of their term, or 6 months before the end of their term, and right now they would resign. There wouldn't be enough time for a second election. We're just down a person. I don't think that benefits anyone. I think if someone plays the game of they move into the thing 30 days before, they get elected and they move around the city, first off, they're going to get called on that. And second off, it's not like the risk of leaving the city is a huge one, and I completely understand that. But within the city, like, someone's really going to move into a place within the city to get a different district and then move back. That does not seem like a reasonable risk. So I understand it. I don't think it's worth. That's quite a bit of language to add to the ballot measure, which means that we'll have more complexity to present to voters. So I was only doing this for the simplicity of not having to deal with that.
Is there a motion on the floor or not?
I think there was a movement.
Can I make a suggestion? How about I bring back both what committee member Cooley said and language similar to what San Jose said, and I'll put them up side by side, and then next time you can vote which one you like.
That is
You have more
acceptable
time
me.
to think about it, and then, I have more time to give you some options.
And, Member Benito.
Is it enforceable if somebody, if we put the language
No.
in? That's-
Either way, it's really not
See,
very
that's what
much
I mean.
enforceable.
We're putting language in that's just going to be, garbage language.
It's
So,
enforceable by the voters, basically, really. I mean, it's very hard for the city council or the city attorney to enforce, but it is enforceable by the voters ultimately if people want to play games.
The election time part is enforceable, though, right?
It is enforceable. I mean, there was I know there was a Board of Supervisors member in San Francisco who really didn't live in the district. He didn't even live in the city. He he gave an address of a property that he owned, but he really didn't live there, and he lived in Daly City, and there was a whole big lawsuit about whether he was properly elected or not. We don't usually have that kind of problem here, but because people really know who really lives here. But anyway, I'll bring, how about that? I'll bring back both sets of language and you can choose at that time.
I would like the clerk to do a survey of our neighboring cities and see how many of them have those two options.
We would probably only have to look at charter cities.
Okay, that would be fine. All right.
Yeah, I think we need to be really cautious about coming too quickly to a resolution about language, because for some of us, for me particularly, I really like to see things written down, and I can look at it and process it that way. It's very difficult for me on the fly to say something. I mean, I don't think much of it is actually enforceable, but the language that we should have in the charter is the best language that we can find. So I really appreciate the idea that you would bring us some examples, and we could look at that, and then that would help us wordsmith what we need.
And you have to remember that this is going to be in the ballot. So whatever language you put is going to be in the ballot, so the more complicated you make it will have an effect on whether it gets passed.
Well, it's only a recommendation to council. They can change it however they want, yeah. So, but my understanding is that we are just giving general guideline to the attorney. He will create the actual language that we want to forward to council, and that will be in our packets next time, so you can read it in advance of the meeting. Yes, Member.
So, Member Benito, if you want to amend your motion to request both, I will consent to that as the second.
Okay, I will amend my amendment to both.
To request both, and I'll consent as the second.
Okay, so made by Benito, seconded by Cooley, that there will be two options presented to the committee. Okay.
I want to get a clarification on what these options are. There's the option of moving within the city is okay, and then the other one is moving within the city is not okay. And then Committee Member Coulterman also talked about 30 days before. Is that also,
Yes,
because that might be independent of the other two options anyway?
No, there's two options. One is San Jose, and then one is what Mr. Cooley had recommended.
Okay.
Okay, so all in favor of having two options presented to us? Aye. Opposed? No one. It passes unanimously. All right. Now we're on to item number 8, which is language on redistricting. So the city attorney had mentioned 2 meetings ago that we probably want to give some advice to the council as to how district lines might want to be drawn after a census.
So once again, I have a slide. It's just asking some questions that might help guide the discussion. So as far as a redistricting committee, some questions you might want to consider discussing amongst yourselves is who appoints that districting committee? What would the size of the committee be? How long do they serve for? Typically redistricting happens with every census, so it's every 10 years. So this question is saying, they just serve for that one, or do they serve for 2 cycles or 20 years or whatever? Again, it's just a question you'd have to discuss amongst yourselves. Are there any requirements about not running for office and for what duration? So there was, obviously one of our committee members was on the prior redistricting committee, and I know that they signed a commitment not to run for public office. And so the question is, would you want to do that? And for what duration would they sign to not run for public office? And then in this scenario, would that apply to citywide offices? Because we're talking about redistricting within a district. Being part of a redistricting committee that changes the lines within the districts does not affect the electability of somebody at large for the whole city. So that's another question you just might want to ask. So does it apply to citywide offices? So let me just clarify that. So in the example, Mr. Rocosa was on the prior redistricting committee that just happened, and so if he had participated in redrawing the lines, would that impact his electability for an at-large or a citywide office anyways? And so that's a question that you would ask yourselves. And then the last one is about a similar question to the prior one. Would you put any requirements for members of this redistricting committee to not being an officer for any candidate. So a treasurer or some other officer for a candidate campaign. And again, for what duration, and would that also apply to citywide offices? So those are just questions to help guide your discussion, and that's all I have on this item.
Member Colterman.
Yeah, in the interest of time, given that it's already after 9 and we're supposed to end at 9, I would like to see the language from other cities. What other charter cities that have districts, how are they handling this so that we're not starting from, ground zero on this?
And I did look at both San Jose and San Francisco. What San Francisco does, they both have in the charter language about exactly this, what committee. Now, they're set up differently, so they, like, I think San Francisco has a formula for who gets to appoint to their districting committee. Remember, this is only going to happen once every 10 years. What they do first in San Francisco is they actually, their original district map was actually part of the charter, and then every 10 years, they, after the census data comes out, they have a neutral person look at the census data and see if the population got redistributed such that the districts needed to be redrawn. And then if they didn't need to be redrawn, then nothing happened. Then there was no, the district committee didn't go into effect. And then if they did need to be redrawn, then there was a formula for forming a districting committee with kind of elements of different interest groups having appointments to it. They have an elected mayor there, so I think the mayor got to appoint 2, and then somebody else got to appoint. And so I could bring you that language. I have it, I've looked it up. San Jose also has a districting process in their charter, so I could bring these things to you. But you'll want to think beforehand, because I don't think we'll probably be in a position to necessarily adopt either one of them. But you might want to think about the kinds of things you will want to put, because I think it'd be very hard at the next meeting to come up with language of a whole charter section on this. So more the sentiments of what you're looking for, as opposed to actually adopting certain charter language.
Member Ricosa.
Given for memory to serve, since it's a recent memory, so my answers to the questions would be just to resolve who appoints the city council. What is the size of the committee? 3 is too small. 5 or 7 would be great. How long do they serve for? Just that period, because it's once every 10 years. Any requirements about not running for office? It was interesting. At first, it was 10 years that you couldn't run. Then they reduced that to 5 years. So my answer would be 5 years there. And I'd say it doesn't apply to citywide offices. It would only apply to offices that are subject to the districting that just occurred. That would make sense. Not being an officer or any candidate, I believe that's true, that you shouldn't be an officer for any candidate running for a district-based election. That's it.
Okay, Member Cooley.
Okay, so there's a state law on this. It's Election Code 23,000, and it explicitly states, it basically defines 3 different options. It's you have an advisory committee, a hybrid committee, or an independent redistricting committee, which the status of those is basically advisory, brings suggestions to the city council. The hybrid will bring 2 options to city council, and city council must choose one of the 2. And the independent is they could just do the adoption by themselves. The rules are already in state law for the bottom 2, where it says if you're a hybrid or if you're an independent, there are blockouts of how long you can not run for the things that you are redistricting. It has definition of spouse, it has definition of family member, it has everything in here. What it doesn't have is it explicitly says the local government shall decide how someone is onto this committee. So that would have, if we're going to do one of those, we have to decide how. It also explicitly states that a local jurisdiction may establish by resolution, ordinance, or charter amendment, independent, hybrid, or advisory. So obviously we could do it in charter. We also could say, hey, this is we could put in our recommendation, city council should do by resolution one of those 3. We could say which 3. Right, so we have some options for later if we want to. But so this is there. So just in terms of, I would assume those bottom ones, we would not have additional requirements. Use this state law. That seems to make perfect sense. And really the only question would be, how does someone get onto this committee? How big it is? And do we want to make it into our charter recommendation, or do we want to just be city council, we recommend as the committee that you adopt, let's say, an independent advisory committee by resolution after this passes, which I think would be a fine recommendation just as well. So anyway, just there was options already established, and as I understand it, this is the law. Like the people got this law passed, and they've gone to all the cities, including San Jose, to get them to get independent committees. This was why this law was passed, was to do that.
Well, or the charter could simply say, use option number 3 in state law. I mean, that could be that.
So the state law does not say how someone gets on the committee or how big the committee is.
So you could fill
So
that
you'd have to figure that out, but it does, when the map has to be available, how many days, it has a lot of stuff in it, so.
Okay, any other, Member Colt?
I heard from many people they want the committee to be independent, that was an overwhelming sentiment.
Anyone else? What I recommend is that since we're deferring this decision to the next meeting, that the staff email to all of us some background information so that we can be prepared and save time in our next meeting.
I think we would just try to get that particular report out to you earlier as part of the packet.
Okay, as part of
as opposed to.
Yeah, we have almost a month, so yeah. Right. Okay, Member Cooley.
So I would request that as a committee, we decide if we would want this in the charter amendment, or we would want this as a recommendation for a future charter amendment, or we would want it as the city council should do a resolution to do this. It sounds like there's some interest in one of those, but like if we decide that now, then that gives some direction to like, what, are we writing up charter language, or is it just what people are doing?
I think what I could do is I could come back with maybe 2 or 3 possible charter sections for you. One would be just simply pointing to a state law option with some things you'd have to decide, or another would be, do you want to do something similar to San Jose, or do you want to do something similar to San Francisco? And then we could fill in the blanks from that point on.
I'd like to open it up to members of the public now. Any member of the public like to speak on this item?
Steve Chesson, President of Californians for Electoral Reform. I just wanted to make 2 corrections to what Committee Member Cooley said. A hybrid commission presents 2 or more maps to the legislative body from which they choose. It's not restricted to just 2 maps. It can be 2, 3, 10, whatever they want. Secondly, what's in state law technically does not apply to charter cities. Charter city can say we will do what's in state law in terms of the restrictions around independent redistricting commissions who can be on them, but a charter city could also do something different. So it's important to keep in mind that a charter city is not restricted by what's in sections 23,000 through 23003 of the Elections Code. And I highly recommend that you read that section of the Elections Code, 23000 through 23003. It's not very long. It's not hard to read. It's written so that people can understand it.
Any other member of the public? Please state your name and whether you're a resident.
My name is Kevin Park, and I'm a resident. So, actually, Steve and I have talked about this for a while. And again, when we talk about independent, there's 2 things that independent can refer to. One is the recommendation for the districts, and the other one is like, how does the redistricting committee get appointed? And I would like it to be independent on both. But again, when I look at Menlo Park has a lot of restrictions for what you can do if you're appointed to the committee. For example, once you've been elected, a member of the committee shall not do any of the following: while serving on the committee, endorse, work for, volunteer for, or make campaign contribution to a candidate in an elected office in Menlo Park, be a candidate for elective office in Menlo Park for 10 years commencing with the date of his or her appointment to the committee. 4 years commencing with the date of his or her appointment to the committee, except an appointment to Menlo Park Board, Commission, or Committee, except employment as staff member or consultant to an elected official or candidate for elective office in Menlo Park, receive a non-competitively bid contract with Menlo Park, or register as a lobbyist at Menlo Park. And I think all of these are good things. And the 10 years is very important, meaning the 10 years takes you out of the census period that you just created districts for, right? And I think that, like, rather than arbitrarily say, well, we did 5 makes sense, actually 10 makes even more sense, right? In the same way that the saying that you must live in your district to continue serving on your continue serving your term. It's like, even though it's not enforceable, it clearly shows intent, and it prevents people from flaunting it, right? Flaunting that law. And I think that when we have a charter, that charter, whether it has teeth or not, that's a different problem. It should clearly show intent. And by softening all of these requirements, we are doing we're not doing any favors to the city here. So that's what I like to say. I would like there to be a lot of teeth. I would like you to look at what other cities are doing and adopt not the most restrictive, but the most fair, based on how can the system be gamed. Again, we just had a presentation this morning. It's not about how things can work. That's not what we're trying to do. Any system can work. It's how do you fix a system so that the failures are not catastrophic? And if we're not looking at how the systems fail, then we are not doing the city any favors. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member of the, oh, yes, Mr.
So
Cooley.
just a note, Kevin, that language is actually verbatim from the state law, except for they changed the state laws 4 years to 10 years. But the rest of those restrictions are, I'm looking at it right here. That's the exact same thing as what they have.
Studied and well thought out look at what's available, and then come up with language that would be good for the city.
Any other member of the public? Okay, I guess we can make a motion to say that the attorney will provide us some options next time. Is there a motion to that effect? It will be in our packets, and we can review the language.
So moved.
Do we need a motion, or maybe not? Okay, all right, so.
Yeah. So, what about the language that goes in for the actual districting? So I was concerned that I was always talking about 3-2, but I was always looking at north to south dividing line. And are we going to work on that type of wording, or are we just going to work on, or just stuck on this thing?
You're saying that you want to direct how the lines would actually
Right,
be
I
drawn?
I guess maybe we can't do that, but I was always thinking of it from north to south to be fair, but yet.
Here's what I think about, so basically we have the 2020 election to get through with the initial map, if we're going to do this for the 2020 election. So a lot of work has already been done. I mean, tremendous amount of work was done through actually 2 successive districting committees, which Steve can tell us all the dirty details of because he sat on it. But so I think we have, I mean, I know that there's this kind of idea about the independents and so forth, but and influencing how the lines are drawn. But so much of the, as Dr. Gobele can tell us, so much of the rules are federal rules about the population distribution is the absolute primary consideration. So there's only so many different ways you can draw the lines in Santa Clara because of that. And so Dr. Gobele, I think, could give us a lot of guidance as to what you might want to do if you want to give direction on, for example, really when we're talking about if we're going to run 3 districts in 2020, you're really going to have to just combine 2 of the 6 districts to each of the 2 6 districts. And so it's really just going to be a question of, should we combine this district with this district or this district with that district? So maybe we can ask Dr. Gobele to prepare some options on that question.
Member Cooley.
Yeah, so member, my understanding is if you want to set up rules for a redistricting committee, the 2 you need are who appoints and or if it gets elected, because you could totally elect that, on what the size is, but you're totally able to put anything like the mission of this body shall be to do blah, blah, blah. It has to follow all the federal rules, obviously, but you could put something in there like, you know, the things that we value in Santa Clara are Northwest balance or whatever. So that would be totally valid to put in something like this.
I'm talking about a different question. I was trying to address Committee Member Amazol's question, which was what are we going to do about, is this committee going to give some kind of direction about the initial map? In other words, it's not redistricting, it's just simply what are the initial districts going to look like?
I'm answering Member Benito's question about can we add. So my understanding is yes, if we wanted to, we could, as part of our structuring of redistricting committee language, we could say these are your priorities or these are the things you should consider in the charter. Like that would be a fine thing to have. I don't know if we want to, but it would be valid. You're defining a new body, right? So you can say, here's your mission.
But I'm not talking.
I'm not responding to you. I'm responding to him.
Oh, okay.
I'm responding to his comment of can we do that? The answer is yes, we could. I don't know if we want to, but yes, we could.
Yes. I think we dropped that. I think we're just,
No second.
It's just advice that he's going to come back and with some language. Member Ricosa.
As Mr. Doyle alluded to, this is a very complex issue, and having run through it, it's not, I mean, even trying to give direction without the knowledge, the deep demographic knowledge that the demographer has, we shouldn't even be dipping our toe into this, and we should be, you know, enabling the right people to go off and study it and do it. Otherwise, you know, there's little value for a high-level direction for us to provide.
I would.
And that's not part of our charter of this Charter Review Committee anyway.
Yeah, I would totally agree with Steve. What prompted me to ask to be on this committee was I went to the last couple of meetings of the committee that talked about the redistricting, and Dr. Gobele was there, and I was so impressed with how difficult it is to draw the lines that I feel absolutely not qualified to do that. And therefore, I stay out of the conversation because I would like to leave it to the professionals. Although I think that where we can give guidance, we should. But beyond that, I think that the work of what those I mean, I give my friend here, Mr. Benito, all kinds of credit for having an idea of how to do it. I don't have an idea of how to do it because I know it is guided by law. So I respect that and hope that we will be able to live with that, that they leave that part of it to the people who are clearly professional and know what they're doing. Thank you.
I just feel I have to say this. We're talking about two different things. We're talking about what election are we going to run in 2020, and then we're talking about a redistricting committee that's in the charter. So the question I have is it this committee's idea that you're just simply going to recommend three districts, but have no input as to how those districts are drawn? Because if you don't do that, then the council will have to decide how those districts are drawn. See what I'm saying?
Correct. And what I was hoping that we would do was advise the council as to which of those three options we were interested in, an independent committee or...
No. No. I'm talking about for the initial election in 2020, unless you could do that. You could say, and council shall adopt an ordinance, just like they did for Measure A, council shall adopt an ordinance to adopt districts after going through some kind of districting process or a review of the previous districting process. Or you could say, we'll take the existing six districts and we'll just recommend these districts will be combined. We know that if you combine any of the two districts, it should work out from a population distribution standpoint, it should work out okay. You could either get into that or not get into it. But if you don't get into it, you need to at least have some kind of recommendation to council as to how council should proceed with the initial three districts.
because that's not subject to the redistricting. That's the initial districts, how they should look at
I understand.
creating
So
the
it's
three
just
districts.
for the 2020 election.
It sounds like your question is related to item number 9 here. So can we finish 8, which was about redistricting, and just get that closed, and then we can talk about how input we want onto the initial redrawing?
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Just because I do want us to close that. We just keep going back and forth. So, so actually, I do have a comment on redistricting. I do want to disagree that I think it is in our charter, just because I think it's the height of, it'd be the height of irresponsibility to adopt districts and leave no process for how redistricting happens. That's how a lot of things have gotten a mess. I think a minimal suggestion would be either council, you should, when we put this on the ballot, and then you should request a future charter committee to deal with redistricting, or you should adopt by a resolution. I think that's like the minimal we should recommend is, redistricting is an issue that comes out of districts. And at the very minimum, we should have a line in our recommendation saying, here's how it should be dealt with. If that line is, please deal with it later, I think that's a fine recommendation, but I don't think not having it in our recommendation would be a responsible thing. My personal preference would be when we get the language, we'll see if there's anything in there we want. And if there is, we can talk about if it goes in the current charter amendment or we say do it later. But in terms of it not being in our mission, I think that's very dangerous to adopt districts and just have no plan on paper of what happens when the maps get redrawn, right? That's risky. So just in terms of whether it's in our mission or not, I think it's absolutely in our mission to at least comment on what happens on this eventuality.
Okay. Any other comments? So my expectation is we'll see some language from the attorney, and we can decide at our next meeting. I am in favor of giving some guidance to the council. All right. So now we will, do we do public comments on this? No, on redistricting? Okay, yeah, okay. So now we're moving on to item number 9, and I'm actually confused. I don't understand why this is on the agenda.
This is fine. You took motions, or you took action on each kind of sub area. So unless there's anything outside of what you've already discussed in 6, 7, and 8, then number 9 in agenda item number 9, there's nothing much more to discuss there. So.
Okay.
Well, it was just simply the point I was making before that. Yeah, it didn't sound like you wanted me to say again, but it was it was just simply when we did the initial Measure A, there was some direction about how do you initially. So the question is this: when the voters vote in March, should they have the actual 3 districts that they know that they're going to be the initial 3 districts, or, and we'll almost need to know that because of the whole transition plan issue in terms of, because you have the 2 existing council members that were elected. So we'll almost need to know that. So the question is do you want to have input into what those initial 3 districts look like, or do you just want to punt that to the council? Is basically the question. And San Francisco, when they adopted districts, they actually attached a map to the charter amendment language in the ballot. And that was in the charter language, and in the charter, their initial map is in the charter. So that's an option for you. Do you want us to bring something like that back, or do you just want to just give direction to council as to what to do?
Okay, Member Benito.
You know, what I was trying to do by giving a little direction is, we did this public outreach, is try to bring the information and get it to the council, kind of through some kind of recommendation. Not to try to gerrymander or do this, but just tell what I've heard from people. So, it's kind of a minor thing, because the council is going to do what they're going to do. But in terms of our recommendation, that's what I was thinking. Wasn't trying to, kind of mess the whole thing up for you.
So then what I can do is charter language, I can just bring back the same language we used in Measure A that talks about this is how you would draw the initial districts.
Okay, Member Silva.
I thought at the last meeting, our demographer, the doctor, said she had a mock three-district set up. Is that true?
The redistricting committee did consider various three-district plans, and I can bring them back to you. I can send in what the redistricting committee saw before, and I believe I also have an analysis of what are the characteristics of these plans, relatively speaking, you know, how they compare with each other. But I have to go back and see what I've got. I can't remember right now. And I also mentioned the possibility of combining the 6-district plan now in place so that we just have 2 and 2 and 2. And I'm not sure they have to be contiguous. So perhaps District 1 and District 6 could be a single District A. I'm not sure. I think contiguity is recommended for districting, but I'm not sure if it's required legally. I'm not sure about that. Yes, in any event, I don't think there are very many choices in that case for 3 districting plans based on work already done. But I do need to review what we did for you before.
Okay, Member Cooley.
So on this, I think it was a big mistake for Measure A to go on the ballot with a proposed map. I think people merged the process of the map and how much they didn't like what particular maps were coming up with the process of the thing. So I would strongly recommend that we do not attach a map to this measure when it goes on the ballot. I think that would be a mistake. I do not think we're going to have a redistricting process in 2 years. That'll sort out then when whatever that's going to be. So I think we should do something for the immediate term, which I think is just the 2020 and maybe 2022 election. It should be what could be simple, which to me is combine the districts we have, merge them together in a way that makes sense. I mean, yes, this will be the transition plan. And I would not recommend having a process to actually move lines around for 2 years. That's just going to be viewed as a waste of money, and people already throw words at us about why you guys are spending so much time on this issue. And I would not recommend I would recommend staying with what we currently have, and I would not recommend doing it as part of the amendment. I would say in the amendment it'll just have the word "we're going to do this," and then should the amendment pass, have that process happen. Just because, so for the 2 things, I don't think it was a mistake to attach the maps, and I don't think we should redraw the lines and then have to redraw the lines again in 2 years. So might as well just use the lines we have, and then in 2 years we'll deal with getting fair lines according to the new census. Anyway, that's my.
Member Almazal.
Now I am completely confused because what I heard people saying was when you showed us the map and you talked to us about the districts when we were explaining the Charter Review Committee and what we were looking at, people liked looking at that map. And I heard tonight that people said, you know, they liked the 6 districts because it allowed for more democracy to take place. I don't know if that is correct, but that's what some people thought. So now I am conflicted as to whether or not showing a map of what 3 districts, the 3-district plan would look like would be prudent or not in the election. Because it seems like the people think we should give them more information, not less, and if we don't show a map, at least an example of what it could be, then it looks like we're saying, see, it's the same old, same old. They made a decision. That's not what I wanted. I wanted the 6th district, but they made a 3-district, and now I don't even know where it's going to be. That's my confusion tonight, and so
I think we're all getting tired and a little bit confused. So why don't we do this? We'll bring you back some options of if you want to go with a map that you recommend. We'll have maps for you to choose from.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to do that and suggest to the city council that they come up with a process for it,
right.
You could do that option.
That's fine. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments from members? I'm going to open it up to the public. Do any of you have any comments about whether maps should be included in the measure or whether, well, we're talking about this whole thing, so we're talking about number 9. So we were just discussing whether we should have maps as part of number 9. So now I'm asking, okay, so does anyone have anything on number 9 that they would like to discuss?
Yeah, I'm waiting for something to come up on the screen.
Don't bring any more good ideas.
You almost had it. Can you make it? Great, good enough, thank you. I feel and this one with this one, and this one without. That's the only way you can make 3 districts out of the existing map. That's true. That is true, yeah, it's the only thing you can do. And have your redistricting commission take effect after the census, and they would draw lines in 2021 for the map that you would use to adopt in 2022. That's the best way of doing it. And frankly, based upon what something that the city clerk said, the people who get elected, if the districting plan, my recommendation again would be, even if you win the appeal, just adopt the current 6-district plan for 2020 and elect those other 4 people in 2020 and then transition to your 3 districts in 2022. It's a lot simpler. And then you don't have to worry about the fact that some people live in districts that have already elected people.
Thank you. Mr. O'Keefe.
I'm with Miss Amazon. I'm totally confused. I thought that per the court order that we're under, I'm not really worried about a court order, but the 2020 election will be with 6 districts. Unless we win the appeal, then I believe it'll be whatever we come up with in 3 districts. Okay, so that's a big if, but we need to get the verbiage in our Constitution, in our charter, saying what that is before we even think about going to 20 or 22. But I did have one question. I kind of looked it up. Is it through the election of 2020? So the court order says it's effective for the 2020 election. Is that correct?
That's correct.
No. I'm talking the December 2020 election.
November 2020.
Correct.
The current court order says you're going to use the 6-district plan for November 2018 and 2020, and it says which districts run in each election.
Now, if we're under that court order, say we lose the appeal, can we change the districting process in the middle since we have elected those people to a 4-year term?
If we lose the appeal?
Correct. And because we're doing 6 districts
if we lose the appeal, we'll have to run a 6-district election in 2018.
No.
In 2020.
No, I'm sorry. If we win because we're only held to the 6 districts through the 2020 election.
Correct.
So win, lose, or draw, 2022 or 2024, there's going to be a new thing in our charter. But if we lose the appeal and we have to do the 6 districts in the 2020 election, and they're elected to 4-year terms, could we even think about removing those people 2 years early? Or does it go all the way through?
That's why we're talking about 2-year terms for the transition.
Yeah, but it won't be a transition because we've been ordered to do the 6 districts through the 2020 election.
So to answer your question, you would not and could not remove anybody before their term is over. You would just start the transition plan later.
Correct.
But you would still require a transition plan, and during that transition plan, some council members, depending on which cycle you're going to start the transition plan, would only serve for a 2-year term, such that when the transition plan is complete, you have 3 council members running in one election and 3 council members running in
But
the
they
other.
won't be able to run until even the 2-year term till 2024. Okay. That's.
Right, and there is a point that you should think about. If we lose the appeal and we run the 3 districts in 2020, then we'll have a problem. Because if the court order is considered to be effective for 2020 with 6 districts, and you run 4 people in 6 districts, this plan that you're talking about now won't work. So you could recommend the charter amendment that says you run 6 districts in 2020, and then for 2022, you do the three with alternating.
Well, I think if we lose the appeal, we have no choice. We're running 6 districts in 2020.
Right, but the problem is if you lose the appeal and we pass the ballot, this is only a problem if we lose the appeal and we pass the ballot measure, then we'd still have to have another ballot measure for 2022 because it wouldn't work out the right way. If we're under the court order to run this, if we lose the appeal and we have a court order that tells us we have to run a 6-district election in 2020, then we can't implement this charter amendment. I mean, there would be a real question as to whether we could. It would probably be a big lawsuit if there.
I don't think
So I
think we could go, yeah. We
Can't-
couldn't make the changes any sooner than the 2022.
Right, but the language in the charter amendment would talk about specific years. And if people were elected, if 4 people were elected in a six district election in 2020, then in 2022, our charter language would make no sense.
So, in either case, you would still pass it in March of 2020, and the court order would still be in effect in November of 2020. The transition plan would be different because in one scenario, you have 4 people running and you got to transition that over to 3. In the other scenario, you have 2 people running and you would have to wait until 4 people ran so that you could transition it over to 3. So, city attorney is right. It does make a difference if you win or lose the appeal. The transition plan is what changes in both of those scenarios. Passing this in March doesn't affect that. So the court order would still be in effect if we lose the appeal, whether or not we have the at-large by seat or the new charter language.
Yeah, but unless we put the different contingencies into the charter language,
That's what we need to do.
we have to do that.
We have to do that. Yeah. Okay, Member Cooley.
So, my recommendation on this is that we just, we write our transition plan for 2022 and say that we're going to adopt this new system in 2022, and we just write it in such a way we assume that the 2020 election could either be the old at-large system if we win the appeal, or it'll be the 6-district system the court ordered, and we just let that resolve the way it resolves, and we get our stuff solid for 2022 onward.
Or the other alternative is to have the charter read, we run a 6-district election in 2020, and then we transition in 2022.
As part of the transition plan, we could do that. But I would
Because
definitely...
it would be really weird to have it'd be really weird to have a citywide election with numbered seats and then try to do a transition.
I understand. I'm just saying my suggestion is we do we focus our new solution for 2022 just for the simplicity of.
All right, we'll bring back some options.
I'm also very uncomfortable with running the old seat thing in 2020 because it would subject us to another lawsuit. So.
It would only subject us to another lawsuit if there was an election that could be proven to have occurred in violation of CVRA.
I
Not
understand.
just simply that we had an at-large election.
Right. It just, someone could sue us and then we could win that lawsuit, but we could get
There'd be
sued.
no remedy because there's already a solution on the books at that point.
Anyway, it is very late. I'm hearing some grumblings, but there is another member of the public who would like to speak, so come forward. Please state your name and whether you live in the city of Santa Clara.
My name is Kevin. I am a resident of the city. Actually, this discussion puts this charter review change into question for me, which is I feel that any charter change could wait until the result of the appeal to actually go forward. I hear what Mr. Cooley is saying, and I completely disagree. If I look from a symmetry and fairness perspective, I would say that running 6 districts, I agree with the city attorney, who thought I would say that, that running 6 districts regardless of whether we win or lose the appeal in 2020, and then changing to the new system for 2022, would be the most, I want to say, fair to the electorate who would, you know, in terms of who would be given the votes or who would be allowed to vote going forward. But the biggest question is, why are we deciding on charter change language before we know the result of the appeal? I almost feel like we can wait on that as well. I mean, I feel like we're doing a lot of work to make things consistent while we're changing, and that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
I can answer that question.
I would like the city attorney to.
That would make it very sensible. If we win the appeal and we don't have the charter changed before the November 2020 election, then the November 2020 election will go back to the at-large system by seat. So that's the reason that we're trying to do the charter change before we know the results of the appeal.
Understood.
It would be great if the court would give us the answer before the March election. That would be really fantastic, but we don't have any way of knowing that.
Because with that, I guess I'm going to even more strongly suggest that we stick with six districts in 2020, whether we win or lose the appeal. And if you take a look at how people vote in the last election and this election, and the representation people get year upon year upon year upon year, that also gives them the it's the most fair in just terms in terms of how many times people get to vote. So I guess we'll wait to see what happens with the appeal to figure out what happens in 2022. But I feel like in 2020, like the simplest and most fair thing to do would be to stick with the 6 districts, and then the discussion could be on how we want to change for the future.
Thank you. Any other member of the public? Is there a motion to adjourn? Second? All in favor? Aye.